Others not only didn't find it expensive, they rushed to beg my dad to carry it. Just when my dad was at the peak of his success, unexpectedly, disaster struck. While my dad was carrying a century-old coffin, he encountered the strange phenomenon of 10 no lifts. My father knew this was a don't lift the coffin situation, and quickly called on the ancestral master to save his life. Afterward, my father thought everything would be alright, but unexpectedly, at the moment of my birth time was a rare 9 hours 9 minutes and 9 seconds on September 9th, and outside our house, a group of fierce ghosts appeared, carrying a coffin, trying to take me away. Seeing this, my father, without a word, grabbed an axe and chopped off his own left hand, and I swore I'd never carry a coffin again. That's what saved my life. Sadly, my mother died of hemorrhaging on the spot. The villagers always said I was a jinx, cursed to bring misfortune to my mother. Everyone alienated and isolated me. I gradually grew up under the strange gazes of others, until I turned 20. My father handed me the same axe from that year and said, 20 years have passed. He still won't let me go. Joer, take the axe and chop off 3 fingers on my right hand. I stood there, stunned, staring at my father. Are you delirious? Who would chop off their own father's hand? Chop. If I don't cut off my own hands. There was only one outcome, death. Seeing I wouldn't budge, my father stormed off. When he returned, 3 fingers were missing from his right hand. The bright red gauze felt like 1,000 steel needles piercing my heart. Unable to bear the blow, I collapsed to the ground. After that night, my father's wound became infected, adding another layer of hardship to our already impoverished family. In the end, I had to shamelessly borrow 800 yuan from relatives. Under the care of the village's barefoot doctor, I was actually cured. Not long after, my father's friend, One-Eared Chin, came to visit. One-Eared Chin, after having a couple of drinks, looked at me outside in the courtyard. He turned to my father and said, Chin, to be honest, you might as well let Joer be a pallbearer. Get out. Don't you ever mention this again. Dad suddenly lashed out at One-Eared Chin. I was completely stunned. I'd never seen him so angry. But the words carrying a coffin were definitely burned into my memory. After One-Eared Chin left, I asked Dad, what did Uncle Chen mean? My old man sighed and said, you're born with your fate sealed. I've kept it from you for 18 years, but I'll tell you today. For generations, our family has made a living as coffin bearers. When it came to my generation, I didn't want you to follow in my footsteps. A few days later, One-Eared Chin came to our house. I asked One-Eared Chin, Uncle Chin, how much do you earn for carrying a coffin? It depends on whether the deceased died a natural death. The price is higher for those who died a violent or unnatural death. Uncle Chin, I'm asking you how much you earn per job. At least 500. One-Eared Chin held up 5 fingers. That much. I couldn't help but think that if I carried a coffin just once, it would be enough for my dad and me to live on for a while. Plus, I've recently run out of money to buy medicine for him. Honestly, I was really tempted. I remember the most I ever made carrying a coffin was 8,800. One-Eared Chin continued to tempt me with the lure of money. These days, even a mad dog will bite. So why not carry a coffin? Who cares if it's money from the living or the dead? Uncle Chin, can I join you in carrying coffins? One-Eared Chin shook his head and said. He then pointed behind me. You need to get your dad's permission. I turned around and saw my dad walking out of the room. Dad sighed and said, like father, like son. A rat's son will dig holes. Dad, I want to help Uncle Chen with the coffin carrying. Earn some pocket money to help out with the household expenses. Joer, there's no turning back once the arrow is released. Think it over carefully. Contrary to his usual self, Dad didn't get angry. Instead, he gave me the choice. Dad, I know what I'm doing. I want to follow Uncle Chen's coffin. Dad's face was expressionless, as if my choice was something he expected. Since coffin bearers need to have a master, I kowtowed 3 times to One-Eared Chin. One-Eared Chin then became my master in name. He became my guide. After One-Eared Chin left, my father told me stories about the pallbearing profession. Apparently, pallbearers are also called lifters of the een and heavy or spirit senders. Those in the profession call themselves the 8 Vajras or the 8 Immortals. There are many taboos in the pallbearing profession. For example, if the coffin touches the ground, a burial must follow. You're probably wondering why I cut off my own hands. I nodded. For the past 18 years, I've never been able to understand why my father did that. 20 years ago, I carried a century-old coffin in western Hunan. It was during that coffin-carrying job that the accident happened. That's what led me to have to do what I do now. As for why my father did it, he didn't tell me the details. Joer, the truth is, once you enter this profession, sometimes the world isn't what you think it is. A few days later, One-Eared Chin came to my house. There was business at the door. After hearing about the business from One-Eared Chin, Dad frowned. You know there's a taboo against carrying certain coffins. You still dare to take this job? What's there to be afraid of? If it weren't for the client offering a lot of money, I wouldn't do that, One-Eared Chin said with a laugh. It turned out to be Yang village, near us. Old Yang's daughter-in-law, pregnant, was washing clothes by the well, when she slipped and fell in. She and the baby both died. I asked my dad what 10 pallbearers not allowed meant. My dad sighed and said, They say there are 10 coffins you mustn't carry. First, the coffin of an infant. Second, the coffin of someone who hanged themselves. Third, the coffin of a drowned person. Fourth, the coffin of someone buried alive. Fifth, the coffin of a mother and child who died together. Sixth, the coffin of someone buried for over a century. Seventh, the coffin of a wandering soul. 8-bearer ghost coffin. As for the other two, Dad didn't say. Old Chin, are you sure about this? Don't forget how you lost your left ear. Dad asked with a serious face. One-eared Chin scratched his head. Wasn't I just careless that time? You're still so nagging. I can't turn down this business. I already promised the Yang family. Since things have come to this, let Jor go with you. After all, a daughter-in-law has to meet her in-laws eventually. I understand what you mean, father. You want me to get some experience. One-eared Chin told me on the way what to look out for when carrying a coffin. When we first lift the coffin, everyone needs to shout together. We can only straighten up on the count of 3. Second, when walking on mountain roads, the coffin cannot leave our shoulders. Third, when crossing water, the coffin cannot touch the water. I kept these things in mind as I arrived at the Yang family home. Entering the courtyard, I saw the erected funeral hall. A large, black, wooden coffin was placed in the center of the hall. It looks absolutely terrifying. You're all here early. One-eared Chen was greeting the few men beside him. I counted carefully, and there were exactly 6 of them. These 6 men were the 8 immortals. The ones carrying the coffin with me. Come on, guys, let me introduce you to a newcomer. Newcomer. They all looked at me with a hint of disdain. Perhaps all pallbearers have some strange quirks. He's One-eared Chin's son. As soon as One-eared Chin said this, they all froze. They all turned around to look at me. One of them didn't even notice his cigarette burning down to his fingers. Do you still dare to underestimate her? At this moment, their attitudes suddenly took a 180-degree turn. This time, I didn't know how to respond. Fortunately, One-eared Chin came to my rescue. Alright, Jor is new to this business, so I hope you'll all take care of her. I curiously asked why those 6 immortals. Their attitude toward me changed so drastically. Because your father saved their lives. That night, One-eared Chin said midnight was the time when yin and yang intersected. It was the perfect time to bury those who died unnatural deaths. He took out some thick hemp ropes and handed them to us. I, along with the others, gripped the dragon ropes tightly in our hands. One-eared Chin gave me a meaningful look. Jor, don't be afraid. Prepare the palanquin. As soon as One-eared Chin finished speaking, I bent at the waist, keeping in mind what he said. I couldn't straighten up until the signal was given. Lift the palanquin. Just as I stood up, I didn't expect this coffin to be so heavy. I gritted my teeth and stood up, steadily lifting the coffin onto my shoulder. Even if it was just for the 500 yuan, I couldn't back down. I followed the pallbearer's footsteps, circling the coffin 3 times before leaving. It means the deceased is about to leave their family and go to the underworld. Turning the coffin 3 times. The first turn cleanses the deceased of their 5 senses. The second turn frees them from earthly attachments. The third turn allows them to be reincarnated. Something happened during the third turn. Suddenly, the coffin became incredibly heavy. One-eared Chen and the pallbearers' faces changed. I also felt the coffin become heavier. My legs suddenly went weak. I felt like I was about to be crushed. Push harder. We can't let the coffin sink. A few sounds. The ropes holding the coffin snapped. One-eared Chen yelled out. The dragon rope snapped. Vengeful spirits pressed down on the coffin. One-eared Chen and his men immediately started kowtowing to the coffin. Wailing cries erupted from the Yang family. The sound of mourning drifted through the funeral hall. Then, One-eared Chin said to the Yang family, 2 deaths in one household. This was already a taboo for us pallbearers. And now, with the dragon ropes broken, a vengeful spirit is pressing down on the coffin. You should find someone else. Old man Yang suddenly knelt down. You're the head of the coffin bearers. If you don't carry the coffin, what will become of my family? Old man Yang's son also pleaded. Uncle Chen, just help my wife finish this journey. One-eared Chin looked at the other pallbearers. Brothers, what do you think? We can't carry this coffin. This is life-threatening. We don't dare do it. One of the pallbearers said, but according to the rules, since we've taken on this job, if we can't handle this well, the reputation of our 8 immortals will be ruined. Another of the 8 immortals said, I was thinking about how my dad doesn't even have money for medicine. He spoke up to Uncle Chen with one ear. Uncle Chen, what are you afraid of? Just do it. Sometimes money really can force people to a dead end. Such youthful ignorance and courage. The 8 immortals sighed and said, Chin the one-eared, hardening his heart, shouted at Old Man Yang, go prepare a red envelope. I want to open the coffin again. Old Man Yang went into his house and prepared a red envelope. Here's the red envelope, with 4,466 inside, as you requested. Oh, that's a lot. 4,466. I said in surprise. Jor, this is the lowest price. It symbolizes everything going smoothly. One-eared Chen explained. This business is my responsibility. I collected the red envelope myself. If anything goes wrong, it has nothing to do with you guys. Old Chen. We old friends will remember this. I was puzzled. One-Eared Chin accepted the red envelope, so why were the other immortals treating him like this? One-Eared Chin also saw my confusion. You think I wanted to take this money? I hope nothing happens. I thanked God. One-Eared Chin began to open the coffin, and had the family clean the deceased's body again. When the coffin was reopened, I was dumbfounded. As the saying goes, the living have the look of the living, the dead have the look of the dead. But old man Chen's daughter-in-law, he doesn't even look dead. In fact, his complexion is better than a living person's. Old Chen, the one-eared man, placed the shroud in the basin, and said to the Young family, find 4 people close to the deceased, and let the deceased choose who will perform the last rites. Then, the deceased's husband and 3 female relatives stood at the north, south, east, and west sides of the basin. Then he turned the washcloth 8 times to the left, and then 8 times to the right. The washcloth spun rapidly in the half basin of clean water. Whoever the marked corner of the washcloth pointed to would be the one to start cleaning the household shrine. This action is called choosing the kin. Unexpectedly, the washcloth stopped, pointing directly at me. One-Eared Chen glanced at me suspiciously. He then continued to repeat the previous action. The towel stopped pointing at me all 3 times. I had a bad feeling about this. The deceased wouldn't choose me to wipe their face, would they? Jur, why would the deceased choose you? You're not related to her in any way. One-Eared Chin looked at the coffin with a suspicious expression. I tried again. The handkerchief still pointed directly at me. Jur, you can't escape this time. The deceased chose you. 10,000 horses galloped across the grasslands in my mind. I cursed One-Eared Chen's ancestors back 18 generations. I kept telling myself, Chinjiu, you're doing a good deed. Don't be afraid. I wrung out the towel. I lifted the shroud and wiped the deceased's face. The moment I touched him, I felt like I wasn't wiping a dead person's face, but a living person's. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the funeral hall. I couldn't help but look at the deceased. The next moment, the dead man suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes had the dull glaze of a dead fish. I plopped down on the ground, my mind completely blank. At that moment, One-Eared Chen ran to the coffin, and exclaimed, he's staring. The next moment, a bloody tear flowed from the corner of the dead man's eye. A sudden scream pierced the silence of the funeral hall. Blood, blood, tears. Everyone present was stunned, crying tears of blood, eyes wide open in death. That's an ancient saying passed down for thousands of years in the countryside. At that moment, the 2 white candles in front of the coffin mysteriously went out. One-Eared Chin softly addressed the deceased. Only I can hear that sound. If you died unjustly, I'll point to someone now. If he is the one who caused your death, then stop crying. Heaven has its gods. The one who harmed you will naturally be punished. Then I called everyone from the Yang family and pointed to each of them. Finally, he whispered to the deceased, I know who harmed you. You can rest in peace now. The deceased incredibly stopped crying tears of blood. One-Eared Chin closed the deceased's eyes. I was utterly shocked by this scene. Was One-Eared Chin talking to the dead? The Yang family all looked at One-Eared Chin in bewilderment. No one knew what he was up to. One-Eared Chin then told me to continue wiping down the body. I was too scared to keep wiping. This was just too damn terrifying. You can't stop in the middle of wiping down a body. One-Eared Chin scolded. I had no choice but to pick up the cloth again. Thankfully, nothing else happened this time. I wiped down the body of the deceased. Next, we would prepare the coffin again. But before that, Du-Er Chin tied the deceased's arms and calves with cloth strips. The bindings were to prevent the deceased from startling. Once all the procedures were completed, Du-Er Chin bowed 3 times toward the coffin. It was time to place the body in the coffin. After the body was placed back in the black coffin, One-Eared Chin took 4 rivets and hammered them in while chanting. 1 rivet for more sons and wealth to flow. 2 rivets for fortune and blessings from heaven. 3 rivets for high honors and success. 4 rivets for descendants to fill the courtyard. The black coffin was then covered. As One-Eared Chin's voice fell, the coffin lid, adorned with a phoenix in the front and a coiled dragon at the back, was lowered. The sealing of the coffin was thus complete. We wrapped the dragon ropes around the bier. Then we began to lift the coffin. One-Eared Chin held 7 copper coins, then slapped them against the head of the coffin and shouted, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, the living and the dead are forever separated. No ghosts remain in the world of the living. Raise the coffin. We slowly lifted the coffin and carried it out of the funeral hall. Following tradition, we circled the house 3 times. This time, everything went exceptionally smoothly. Accompanied by the drumming and wailing, we left the courtyard. The dark night howled with a cold wind. Walking down the road, suddenly a lightning bolt lit up the sky. A flash of lightning streaked across the horizon. Boom! With the sound of thunder, the rain fell like countless silver swords. It poured down, fiercely striking the earth. In the rain, Du-Er Chin said to the Young family, rain on the coffin, a top scholar emerges. Rain on the grave, 3 generations prosper. Old Chen's words eased the tension considerably. The countryside is mostly muddy paths, and the chosen burial site is on the opposite mountainside, requiring crossing a bridge. Suddenly, whispers arose. It sounded like countless little devils were screeching. Suddenly, thunder roared in the sky. A bolt of lightning struck the ground right in front of us. It was only about a meter away from me. The pallbearer's legs went weak with fright. The coffin swayed precariously on their shoulders. One-eared Jin yelled, "Don't panic. Steady the coffin. The 8 immortals are certainly no ordinary people." With the sound of our constantly moving footsteps, the coffin rests securely on our shoulders. I only have one thought right now, to quickly bury this coffin, and then take the money and leave. I never expected that my first time carrying a coffin would involve such strange occurrences. Finally, I arrived at the riverbank. Then I walked onto this wooden bridge. I don't know how many years old this bridge is. It swayed as I walked on it. Suddenly, I heard a crack. The bridge snapped in half. I missed my footing and fell straight into the river. Luckily, the moment I fell, One-Eared Chen and a few of the pallbearers sensed something was wrong and quickly took a step forward. That's what stopped the coffin from falling into the river. Also, fortunately, the river wasn't deep. I swallowed a few mouthfuls of water and swam back up. Suddenly, I noticed the color of the water seemed to change. Under the spotlights, the water's color was extremely strange. When I looked up, I suddenly felt a chill on my neck. Drip. Drops of blood continuously dripped down from the coffin, landing on my neck. The coffin was bleeding. I yelled to the Bashian above me, "Hurry up." I only reacted when One-Eared Chin yelled. One-Eared Chin put a long bench under the coffin to keep it from touching the ground. Then he grabbed a handful of yellow paper, mixed the ashes with water, and smeared it on the parts of the coffin that were seeping blood, muttering something incessantly. The coffin reeked of a strong, putrid odor. A noise came from inside the coffin. One-Eared Chin suddenly shouted, "Spirits are not welcome in the world of the living. Leave at once." After a few seconds, the sudden sound stopped. Everyone finally relaxed, their hearts returning from their throats. The atmosphere was very strange. After Ju-Air Chin took care of the spot where the coffin was leaking blood, we resumed carrying the coffin. Strange. Why does the coffin feel lighter? A question arose in my mind. At this point, we couldn't afford to think too much. We just wanted to hurry and bury it to rest in peace. After another half hour, I finally arrived. I looked up and saw the pre-dug grave. Suddenly, 3 giant rats appeared. Their eyes stared straight at us. It made my hair stand on end. One-Eared Chin stopped and muttered, "Ghost rats blocking the path." What does ghost rats blocking the path mean? Ghost rats blocking the path is an unlucky omen. It symbolizes that a disaster will befall the family of the deceased. One-Eared Chin tried tossing some joss paper, but the rats remained unmoved. My heart skipped a beat. I realized the rats weren't looking at us. They were looking at the coffin we were carrying. Then a young man from the Yang family named Huzi immediately took an iron rod and smacked the rat in the middle dead. No. Just as One-Eared Chen's voice rang out, Huzi's iron shovel landed squarely on the rat in the middle. "You bastard! Who told you to kill the ghost rat? Are you crazy?" One-Eared Chen cursed angrily. "I saw these rats blocking your path and delaying my sister-in-law's burial, so I swatted that rat dead." One-Eared Chen was speechless. The other 2 rats, seeing their companion killed, immediately turned and fled. "Uncle Chen, what do we do now?" I asked One-Eared Chen in astonishment. "Those of us who deal with the dead, haven't we all encountered a few strange things? I had my ear bitten off by a corpse before. That's why I wear this prosthetic. I survived that. This is nothing." I was stunned. So, Uncle Chen's ear was bitten off by a ghost fire. After One-Eared Chen finished speaking, he continued to direct us to carry the coffin forward. We finally arrived at the burial pit. I let out a deep sigh and gripped the dragon rope tightly in my hand. Then, I slowly lowered the coffin into the grave. Right after the burial, suddenly, 2 mice crawled out of the grave. They immediately charged toward Tiger. Could they be the 2 mice that ran away earlier? A big question mark appeared in my mind. Tiger immediately fainted to the ground. Then, the 2 mice ran off in an unknown direction. Everyone saw Tiger suddenly collapse to the ground. They quickly helped him up. Huzi woke up a few minutes later, looking at everyone with a bewildered expression. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning flashed across the sky, instantly turning a nearby tree into charcoal. A deafening, earth-shattering sound boomed. Immediately afterward, 9 lightning bolts struck in front of us. We all froze in place. After the thunder and lightning subsided, soybean-sized raindrops started falling on the mountain. The rain was getting heavier and heavier. We quickly ran towards the path down the mountain. Suddenly, there was a loud crash. I suddenly saw the mountain peak we were standing on abruptly break apart. Huge boulders tumbled down towards us. One-Eared Chin cried out, "Holy crap, is that a mudslide? Run!" But at that moment, I couldn't think. My only thought was to survive, so I ran for my life. "Run to the other side of the river. We'll be safe once we're across," One-Eared Chin yelled. Without hesitation, we all jumped into the river. "Quickly, swim to the other side of the river." After everyone swam to the opposite bank, they realized someone was missing. It was Huzi, who had been attacked by the rats earlier. One-Eared Chin muttered something towards the fractured mountain peak. "I hope he'll be alright. May fortune favor him." By this time, the world slowly returned to calm. Everyone finally saw that the mountain had been cut in half. We haven't slept a wink all night. Despite our exhaustion, We have to go up the mountain immediately to search for Huzi. By the time we found him, Huzi was already lifeless. He was dead. Huzi's eyes were wide open, as if he saw something terrifying before he died. One-eared Chin sighed and said, "You reap what you sow. Let's go." After One-eared Chin finished speaking, he kept staring at the broken peak, as if recalling something. "Joa, wait a minute." One-eared Chin told me that in this pallbearing business, we have to rest for 7 days after each job. It's the rule. So, we definitely couldn't take it on. After I acknowledged him, I asked him curiously, "One-eared Chin, what is a broken mountain?" One-eared Chin just kept shaking his head. I didn't expect to encounter a broken mountain range. Joer's coffin-carrying tradition has 7 forbidden burial grounds. What are the 7 forbidden burial grounds? I asked One-eared Chin curiously. The 7 forbidden burial grounds are: first, no burial in broken mountains, where the mountain range is discontinuous. Second, no burial on barren mountains, where no vegetation grows. Third, no burial on unstable mountains, where the mountain's form is not fixed. Fourth, avoid burying on a broken mountain with a collapsed ridge. Fifth, avoid burying on an isolated mountain, prominent and without support. Sixth, avoid burying on a sloping mountain, leaning left or right. Seventh, avoid burying on an old mountain, jagged and without vitality. I listened, dumbfounded, to these unfamiliar terms. But this coffin-carrying trip was truly plagued with problems, and it even resulted in a death. It was a truly inauspicious start. Chen, the one-eared man, spoke to Yang's wife's grave in the distance. "I hope nothing happens. Otherwise, I'll have to move your coffin again. It seems you were a strong woman." Then we headed down the mountain. Back home, I looked at the 500 yuan in my hand. This 500 yuan wasn't easy to earn. It was really life-threatening. When I told my father about Severed Mountain, his eyes glazed over. He immediately went to find One-eared Chen. When he returned, it was already late at night. He spent the entire night in his room, constantly flipping through a book. "Dad, why aren't you asleep yet?" I asked. "Joer, you entering this profession. I don't know if it's right or wrong. It's because back then, I was careless, thinking I was invincible, that I made one wrong move and lost everything." Dad closed the book. I saw 4 characters on it. The coffin bearer's notes. "Old man, you haven't documented your entire career as a pallbearer, have you? I was looking for a way to break the mountain's curse, but I didn't find anything after reading it." My father handed me the notebook. This notebook was written by my Qin family ancestors. Generations of Qin family pallbearers. It also records the bizarre events I've encountered. If you have time, take a look. When I opened it, I was shocked to see the first line of text. "The Undertaker's spiritual foundation. The great responsibility of life and death." The events recorded inside are mysterious and unfathomable. Every line is filled with strange and odd occurrences. Things like 9 dragons coiling the coffin, 100 ghosts weeping over the coffin, 1,000-year blood coffin, 100-year shadow coffin. They all piqued my curiosity. Alright, go to sleep now. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink, because the things written in the book were just too terrifying. The next evening, my dad brought me to Broken Mountain. One-eared Chen is with me on this trip. Looking at the collapsed mountain peak from afar, it looks as if it were chopped in half with an axe. A headless mountain with only its base remaining. Truly a rare sight. It's truly bizarre. I haven't carried a coffin in over 20 years. I've forgotten almost everything about it. Now I see a deep pool has formed where the collapse happened. Water gathers and chi accumulates without a source. Looking at the deep pool, my father muttered, "Old Chen, do you believe this mountain was man-made?" "Whoa, how could that be?" One-eared Chen looked incredulous. "I mean, the pool existed before, but it was concealed artificially. This pool was cleverly concealed, existing hidden deep in the mountains. It's only seen the light of day again because of this landslide." "I don't think so," One-eared Chen exclaimed in amazement. "Forget it, I've forgotten a lot of things. I can't be sure anymore." Old Dad chuckled self-deprecatingly. I stand beside the deep pond. The water in the pond is incredibly clear. No one knows how deep this pond is. It's impossible to see the bottom. "Let's go back," Dad called to me from a distance. As I left, I took one last look at the deep pond. Suddenly, the color of the pool became murky. It was replaced by a scalp-tingling black. A dark shadow seemed to be moving in the water. The next moment, the shadow suddenly disappeared. In its place was a black wooden board. I focused my eyes. It wasn't a wooden board at all. It was a floating black wooden coffin. My head buzzed. My mind went blank and I collapsed on the ground. "A coffin!" I screamed. The coffin was covered with snake-like patterns. It looked absolutely terrifying. Suddenly, the coffin sank into the deep pool and disappeared. By the time my dad and One-eared Chin arrived, the deep pool returned to its original state. One-eared Chin looked at me strangely. "What coffin? There's nothing there. Are you hallucinating from exhaustion these past few days? I feel like I've seen that coffin somewhere before." On the way back, I kept thinking about what the coffin looked like. After getting home, I immediately flipped open my coffin-carrying notes. What I found inside shocked me. The materials for coffins are divided into 4 levels. They are 1 god, 2 saints, 3 venerables, and 5 commoners. The 5 commoners refer to ordinary wood for common people. The 3 venerables are coffins made of rosewood, coffins made of golden thread nanmu, coffins made of wangwali wood. The 2 saints are coffins made of jade and bronze. The 1 god is the legendary coffin made of dark wood. I think what I saw today. Is this bog oak coffin? This coffin made of bog oak represents the idea of sink upon death, soul extinguished, becomes Een. It allows communication with the gods, and can protect the body from decay for 10,000 years, and perhaps even allow resurrection and immortality after death. Was it really because my eyes were playing tricks on me? Or was it caused by the fear in my heart? Why could I see it? But after my dad and One-Eared Chin arrived, I couldn't. The next day, my dad asked me to pick something up from One-Eared Chen's place. I arrived at One-Eared Chen's house, and entered to see a girl sitting in the courtyard. This girl's features, a subtle scholarly air about him. He appeared extremely refined. Joer, what brings you here? One-Eared Chin asked. My father said he left something here with you. I've come to retrieve it. While I spoke with One-Eared Chin, my eyes were studying the girl. I was deeply attracted by her aura. The girl smiled at me. Hello, my name is Hong Euro. I'm Uncle Chen's niece. Hello, I'm Chin Jio. I ran my hand through my hair, to hide my awkwardness. At that moment, I noticed a picture on the table. It's a photo of a coffin. The whole coffin is jet black and shiny. 4 words can summarize the coffin. Thin, porous, and wrinkled. This coffin must be made of ebony. As soon as I said that, Feng Euro stared at me wide-eyed. How did you know? This is simple. The wood of this coffin is completely dried and seasoned. Plus, the coffin overall looks charcoal black, yet luminous. But there seems to be a problem with the coffin's dimensions. It doesn't look like it was made to scale. His father was a coffin collector. Joer was naturally influenced by his old man. Chen answered Feng Euro's questions. After finishing, Chin suddenly added, You, a PhD, are actually listening to the nonsense of a high school graduate? Just pack your things and go home. Doctor, I looked at Feng Euro before me. I didn't expect her to be a PhD. You're right. This coffin isn't a real coffin. Or, you could say it's a miniature coffin. A miniature coffin. Sister Feng, what did you major in? I majored in archaeology. When Feng Euro spoke, I was completely stunned. Where did you get this coffin this time? My mentor got it from somewhere, I don't know where. We don't understand the patterns on this coffin. Even my mentor can't explain them. I took another look, and I felt that this coffin and the one I saw in the pool were exactly the same, without the slightest difference. I couldn't help but gasp. This coffin looks like a larger version of the one I saw. Where was your mentor's coffin found? This small coffin was found near the Qinling Mountains, in a farmer's house. Qinling Mountains? The Qinling Mountains are where the broken mountain was that day. This miniature coffin was found in the Qinling Mountains. The coffin I saw was also in the Qinling Mountains. Could there be a connection? I immediately felt uneasy. Can I ask you, where in the Qinling Mountains did your mentor get this miniature coffin? From which village? Feng Euro told me that this coffin was seen at a house in a village called Jizi Village in the Qinling Mountains. Then he bought it. I tentatively asked, can we go ask that family where they got this coffin? I told Feng Euro my thoughts, and to my surprise, she readily agreed. We packed our things and headed to Jizi Village. It's only about an hour's walk. Jizi Village is located at the foot of the Qinling Mountains. We entered Jizi Village, arrived at the door of that house. An elderly couple lives there. Grandpa, we're the students of the people who came to your house last time and bought the small black objects. You know, you're the group that came over a month ago. The old man spoke with a thick Hunan accent. My old man was from Hunan. He fled here during the famine in the 60s. Grandpa, we wanted to ask you where you got that old coffin. Country folk often use old house to refer to a coffin. That coffin has been in our family for quite some time. I found it 20 years ago during the Great Flood. A huge flood. Do you still remember where you found this pot? It was in Hailonggu, not far from the Qinling Mountains. I remember it was around the 1980s. I was collecting firewood in the mountains, when suddenly there was a flood, over 10 meters high. No way. How could there be a huge flood in the Qinling Mountains? One-Eared Chin asked, puzzled. I've been wondering about that too. How could there be a flood in the Qinling Mountains? When I went back the next day, strangely, all the water had vanished into thin air. There wasn't a single trace of a flood, but I stumbled upon that old house. And, thinking it was interesting, I took it home. After saying this, the old man took another long drag on his cigarette. After he finished speaking, Feng Euro walked out. She seemed to be talking on the phone with someone. After a few minutes, she walked back in. A look of surprise spread across her face. Grandpa, could you take us to see the place where you found the old house? Yes, I can. But Black Dragon Mountain is a bit far, and there's something strange about that place. My father-in-law says there are moving stone men there. Grandpa, let's go take a look at Black Dragon Gulch. Feng Euro seemed eager to go to Black Dragon Gulch. The old man sighed, and the 4 of us set off from the village towards Black Dragon Gulch. On the way, the old man told us, thankfully, it's not Black Dragon Mountain, No one dares go to Black Dragon Mountain at night. The old man looked around, appearing extremely cautious, because inside Black Dragon Mountain, restless spirits pass through. And the path my father-in-law took that time was the very path those spirits use. Grandpa, have you ever seen ghosts passing through? I haven't. But some villagers have. Legend has it that during the Qin dynasty, because of the Warring States period, a village near the Qinling Mountains relocated to the Heilong Mountains to escape the calamity. But in the end, for some unknown reason, these villagers were all killed overnight. These dead villagers became vengeful spirits. At night, they go to the only mountain path to search for the people who killed them. I definitely don't believe this. This is completely beyond my comprehension. What the old man said is a bit mythical. But looking at the old man's serious and solemn expression, I felt that he definitely wouldn't lie to us. The truth of the matter cannot be verified. Then, Feng Euro said to us, actually, what Grandpa said about ghostly souls borrowing paths is also recorded in history. But in historical records, it's about ghost soldiers borrowing paths. Actually, the two are quite similar. Feng Euro then told us this story of ghost soldiers borrowing the road. I wasn't surprised, because I had previously read about ghost soldiers borrowing the road in the coffin bearer's notes. This so-called ghost soldiers borrowing the road is because a group of ancient deceased soldiers, whose souls haven't dissipated after death. I still believe I'm alive. My soldier's honor remains. I want to continue to defend my home and country. That's why my soul lingers. That's why, when night falls, I appear on the marching road. During the day, the rhythmic marching sounds disappear. This is extremely puzzling. This is the legendary ghost soldiers passing through. What the old man just mentioned was at most lost souls passing through. We walked for about 2 hours. We finally arrived at Black Dragon Gulch. I looked at Black Dragon Gulch, and it didn't seem any different from an ordinary ditch. Only the vegetation around Black Dragon Gulch was unusually lush. Towering pines, over 10 meters tall, are everywhere. You can tell at a glance that this place is rarely visited. Among the weeds nearby, you can occasionally spot a few discarded compressed biscuit wrappers, proof that this place is likely a haven for adventurous hikers. Entering Black Dragon Gulch, I instantly felt a chill. A large part of Hailonggu is covered by towering trees. From time to time, the calls of unknown animals can be heard. Hailongshan, my niece. Do you know the origin of Hailongshan? Dulchan suddenly said with a smile. I don't, uncle. Do you? According to ancient legends, a black dragon flew out from the Qinling Mountains to the Wei River diversion. Its path formed a ridge, shaped like a dragon. Xian's Longzhou Mountain was formed by this dragon. The dragon's head is the present-day Longzhou village. Its tail is at today's bell tower. But it is said that the direction this black dragon flew from is Heilong Mountain. I looked ahead. Although Heilong Mountain in the distance is a bit far from us, it doesn't diminish the feeling it gives you. Heilong Mountain looks incredibly ethereal. Actually, Heilong Mountain is just not very famous. Many people only know the Qinling Mountains for Zhongnan Mountain, Huashan, and Taibai Mountain. In reality, there are many other smaller peaks. It also has its own legend. It's just that compared to those famous mountains, it's a little inferior. The layout of China's mountain ranges is a system of 3 rows and 4 columns, and the Qinling Mountains are classified as the middle row. The Qinling Mountains divide north and south, separating lands and rivers. Things stretch into the distance, heights grinding against each other. From the Qinling Mountains, one looks west to the Kunlun, north to the vast desert, east to the central plains, and south to towering mountains. Its boundless momentum and continuous grandeur make it difficult to grasp its entirety, yet I have to explore it. The Qinling Mountains truly hold so many unexplainable things. Professor Zhou has spent his entire life studying them and still can't grasp the whole picture. The Qinling Mountains have such a rich and rare history. Any new discovery there is unique in the world. The mausoleum Qin Shi Huang chose for himself after his death lies at the foot of Mount Li, a branch of the Qinling Mountains. Back then, Qin Shi Huang launched massive construction projects to build the Apang Palace. It requires a massive amount of timber and stone. Yet this emperor, who looked down upon the world, explicitly forbade any logging on Mount Qinling for his mausoleum. Once Mount Qinling was, in the already superstitious mind of Qin Yuan, Mount Qinling, considered the dragon vein upon which the rise and fall of his dynasty depended. Indeed, any mountain on Mount Qinling, some people spend their whole lives researching it and still don't understand. Just the alluring legends alone are filled with countless incredible stories. Professor Zhou once told me that every peak in the Qinling Mountains shouldn't be underestimated. It is precisely each of these peaks that connect to form the Qinling Mountains. Because of the Qinling Mountains, the 800-li Guanzhong Plain enjoys favorable weather. The unparalleled splendor of the Zhou, Qin, Han, and Tang dynasties. After Feng Euro finished speaking, she kept staring at Black Dragon Mountain. Grandpa, the flood you encountered back then, did it come from the direction of Black Dragon Mountain? How did you know? Feng Euro smiled and said, the terrain here is lower in the east and higher in the west. Black Dragon Mountain lies to the west. It's bordered by 2 other mountains. I reckon in ancient times, during wars, this Black Dragon Mountain must have been a strategic location. The entire mountain range looks like a black dragon, lying quietly on the earth. I don't really understand it, but Black Dragon Mountain doesn't look as majestic as Manhwa. Mount Tai is massive, but Black Dragon Mountain has its own unique feel. After listening to what the old man said earlier, I feel Black Dragon Mountain can be described in one word: mysterious. Then, Feng Euro suddenly said something that made me freeze. Grandpa, the flood you encountered back then, we can call it the Black Dragon Flood. Black Dragon spits water. What the hell is this? Is the stuff the doctor learned beyond our comprehension? Actually, the Black Dragon spits water might be caused by the waterfall on the mountain, but I still haven't figured out how Black Dragon Mountain produced this flood that's over 10 meters high. How could it suddenly disappear overnight? Is there a huge reservoir underground that can hold so much water? Once this floodwater, more than 10 meters high, flows down, I estimate quite a few underground villages will be flooded. The first one to be flooded will be Jizi village. Dolchin explained. This Black Dragon spitting water is easy to explain, but where did the water actually go? This is truly puzzling. I think there might be a huge reservoir underground. No matter how you put it, a reservoir has a certain capacity. It can't possibly swallow a flood that is several meters high. How large must this reservoir be? How big would this reservoir have to be? It's probably the size of a city. I disagree with Feng Euro. Joer, you just said a city. An underground city. That's impossible. The Qinling Mountains are ancient fold-fault mountains. The northern Qinling Mountains rose above sea level 400 million years ago. It suffered erosion, while the southern Qinling Mountains were submerged by seawater and accumulated Paleozoic sediments. Approximately 80 million years ago, the Qinling Mountains, under the intense transformation of the Himalayan orogeny, underwent large-scale block faulting and vertical uplift, ultimately forming the current landform of the Qinling Mountains. So an underground city is impossible. After listening to Feng Euro's explanation, I was extremely impressed with my own wild imagination. But where did all this floodwater go? How did it mysteriously disappear overnight? It's all a mystery. Finally, Feng Euro sighed and said that after she returns, she'll ask her classmates. Let's see if there are any Qinling geology researchers. Ask them about it. Maybe we'll get some clues. I wasn't surprised when Feng Euro said that. After all, science and technology are so advanced now. A lot of things can be figured out with scientific instruments. We'll know what's going on. Suddenly, Feng Euro's phone rang. Feng Euro continued, using modern technology. The pattern has been restored, but no one understands it. Cece, let me see it. Maybe I can understand it. When Feng Euro's phone received the patterns from that miniature coffin, my eyes never left her phone. My heart felt like it had instantly dropped into an endless ice cellar. I suddenly felt a chill down my back. Is someone watching me from behind? Anyway, when I saw this pattern, I just felt something was off. It made me anxious and flustered inside. I can't really explain why. Feng Euro noticed that I hadn't spoken for a while. I don't know what to say, because this miniature coffin has a drawing that looks like a human eye. Of course, this is just one panel from the top of the coffin. The other 5 panels haven't been sent over. I said to Feng Euro with a laugh, ask your mentor to put all 6 sides together. Let's see what the pattern is. Could it be a face? Haha, not bad. Anyway, we have no clue right now. Might as well let them try. I didn't pay much attention to it after that. After all, I just said it casually. We watched as it gradually got dark. We were just about to leave Black Dragon Gulch, but I had this feeling that something was watching us from behind. I suddenly turned around to look. There was nothing there. But the last time I looked back, I really did see something I wouldn't have dared to imagine in my entire life. That large, black, wooden coffin I saw earlier in the deep pool seemed to have become a giant phantom, appearing above Black Dragon Mountain. My heart skipped a beat. Then I closed my eyes tightly and silently encouraged myself, it's not real. When I opened my eyes, I rubbed them with my hands and could clearly feel a thin layer of mist on my eyelashes. To my relief, the illusory black wooden coffin I just saw had vanished. Could it have been a hallucination? I muttered to myself. I haven't mentioned this to anyone. After all, I'm an atheist. When I was finally almost home, the old man unexpectedly said with a smile, the sun has just set. We've managed our time quite accurately. When I got home that evening, I really couldn't understand it, so I told my dad what I saw in the mountains. Dad immediately frowned and said, how could you see a coffin in the mountains for no reason? You must have been seeing things. I've never heard of such an agreement. I hadn't heard of such an agreement either. I felt awkward to keep asking, but that night, I tossed and turned. I couldn't fall asleep until 4 a.m. Finally, in the morning, I heard a rooster crow, and then I fell asleep. At noon, I still hadn't gotten up. Then I heard someone shouting sober up in the courtyard. You were right. After my classmate scanned all 6 sides of the coffin, and put them together, it actually did resemble a human face. I quickly got up to chat with the beautiful woman. Compared to sleeping in, it wasn't even a contest. It must be beauties first, right? No way, I was just saying that. Professor Joe said he wants you to come to our school. He said he wants you to take a look at that miniature coffin. I told Professor Joe that you saw at a glance that the coffin was made of ebony. Professor Joe was very shocked. I was just guessing. Actually, this wasn't Professor Joe's idea entirely. There's someone else. Someone else? Who? You'll find out when you get there. Okay, I'll tell my dad. I'm not doing anything at home anyway. Xian isn't that far from here. I'll definitely be back by tonight if I leave in the morning. If it weren't for Feng Euro suggesting it, in case I couldn't make it back, with room and board covered, I really wouldn't want to go. I left the coffin carrying notes at home. Because I've already read the book several times, even though there's a lot I don't understand, but I also have a vague memory that after changing my clothes, I went to Xian with Feng Euro. We boarded a bus to Xian. Sister Feng, do you think the Qinling Mountains might have, because of the earthquake, formed a huge pit underground, causing the floodwaters to disappear so strangely? What if there's a really big flood? Could it possibly submerge Xian? It was overwhelmed. This time, things are really unusual. Take the flooding, for example. Any place in China could experience major flooding, but not Xian. Because Xian is a land encircled by 8 dragons. As for earthquakes, don't even think about it. Xian won't have earthquakes. What does 8 dragons surrounding the city mean? 8 dragons refers to the 8 rivers formed by the Wei, Jing, Feng, Lao, Chang, Shui, Chan, and Ba rivers. They flow around the city of Xian. If Xian were to flood, all 8 rivers would have to be filled before Xian could possibly be submerged. Vast are the 8 rivers, diverging tributaries, varying forms. Since ancient times, people have settled along waterways. The discovery of numerous prehistoric sites all emerge from the water. An inseparable connection exists between water and the advancement of human civilization. Water is the cradle of civilization, and the lifeblood of its continuation. After Feng Euro finished speaking to me, we got off the bus at the West City bus station. Xian's weather in August is extremely hot, but even in the heat, there's always a cool breeze. This ancient capital of 13 dynasties truly has its own charm. We finally arrived at Northwest University. Feng Euro is officially starting her doctoral studies at Northwest University. Northwest University is a pretty prestigious university in the 5 northwestern provinces. Its archaeology department, in particular, is top-notch in the country. There's a saying that goes around the archaeology department. Shangxi is tombs everywhere, relics and ancient sites for you to pick and choose. Of course, Feng Euro told me all this. As for the saying that Shangxi is a treasure trove, I doubt many people would disagree. The rise and fall of China, the ancient capital of Chang'an, has witnessed it all. Chang'an, along with Rome, Athens, and Cairo, are known as the 4 great ancient capitals of the world. So, Xian is the heart of Chinese history. The Qinling Mountains are the heart of Xian's history. Feng Euro told me that Xian is the heart of Chinese history. You can see it on the map. But the Qinling Mountains are the heart of Xian. I don't understand this. I finally met Professor Zhou. Professor Zhou was also surprised to see me. Probably because I'm too young. The first time I saw Professor Zhou, my only thought was, this doesn't look like a professor at all. He's completely different from the professor I had in mind. He's just an ordinary old man from the countryside. I thought professors should all be in suits, and erudite. Every gesture should exude an air of knowledge. Professor Zhou has a square face, and thinning brown hair. But what's most striking? It was Professor Zhou's eyes, like bronze bells. Professor Zhou's eyes give you a feeling of depth, a feeling I can't quite describe. If you put Professor Zhou in a crowd, I definitely wouldn't think he was a professor. His clothes are very clean, a spotless Zhongshan suit. On his feet, he wears a pair of old Beijing cloth shoes. The only thing that shows Professor Zhou's status is the watch on his wrist. When I was in high school, my classmate told me the name of that watch, because his uncle bought one. He said it cost tens of thousands. I recognized it. Professor Zhou is wearing an omega. I was able to tell that Professor Zhou was wearing an omega watch, because the symbol of an omega watch is an omega. Omega is the 24th and last letter of the Greek alphabet. It symbolizes the beginning and the end, the first and the last. It means the end, and also a beginning. This is probably the only thing about Professor Zhou that actually fits his professorial demeanor. I heard from Euro that you're a pallbearer. Professor Zhou's voice had a magnetic quality to it. It sounded very pleasant. I nodded. I didn't expect Professor Zhou to say that although the coffin bearers have gradually declined over the millennia, they know no less than we do. Why did Professor Zhou say that? Feng Euro asked curiously. Who's Euro? They carry the coffins of emperors and ministers into the tomb chambers. They're the last people to have contact with ancient emperors. So coffin bearers know a lot of secrets. But there aren't many authentic coffin bearers left now. Most of them are just in it for the money. There really aren't many real coffin bearers left. After Professor Joe finished speaking, his eyes stared straight at me. I felt like my soul was about to be seen through by Professor Joe. You can tell this miniature coffin was made by Ian Chenmu. That shows your expertise is quite remarkable. A true prodigy. As for what Professor Joe just said, I don't know how to respond. I just want to say, my family is so poor that even the mice leave crying. The thief is here. During holidays, we still have to throw some money to support me and my son. Of course, this is just a joke. I'm just making fun of myself. But Professor Joe immediately added, I heard old Yuan mention before, that if an industry continues for 1,000 years, there will surely be a legacy in that field. This kind of inheritance is only known to those within the profession or the circle. Or it's passed down through a book. Anyway, the fact that coffin makers have existed in the Chinese nation for so many years means they have their own skills. To say there's no inheritance would be inhuman. I didn't say anything, because I don't know what to say in response. Professor Joe, your home is at the foot of the Qinling Mountains. Yes, my home is in the Qinling Mountains. The Qinling Mountains are a wonderful place. It's something I've wanted to thoroughly research my whole life, but I'm old now. If I were 20 years younger, I'd really want to make a big contribution. When Professor Joe was speaking just now, I could see the passion in his eyes. I feel like maybe, when someone is obsessed with something, to a certain extent, they probably look like Professor Joe. I guess, because there are 2 bookshelves in Professor Joe's room. Books lined up next to each other. Sit quietly on the bookshelf. Judging by the wear and tear on these books, many of them are damaged around the edges. I imagine Professor Joe must have consulted them quite often. Actually, there's something I wanted to ask you. Did your family keep any of his belongings? No, I haven't even thought about it. I answered resolutely. Because my dad told me before, that the coffin bearer's notes is something that absolutely cannot be known by outsiders. It's a secret of our family. It's a secret of the coffin bearers. I knew you'd say that. Old Yuan is the same. When I asked about his family's situation, his reaction was even stronger than yours. Actually, I understand. Every profession has its taboos, its own set of rules. Naturally, I wouldn't break the rules of you coffin bearers. If you know something, please don't hide it from me. If it doesn't violate ethics or morality, you could even record these things. Leave something for future generations. Otherwise, after a few years, after cremation becomes universal, your ancient profession of pallbearing will disappear. I don't really understand what Professor Joe is saying, but I do know that in the near future, the profession of pallbearing will disappear into history. No one will understand it anymore. But the old Yuan Professor Joe mentioned made me very curious. Could this person also be a pallbearer? I'm only just realizing this now. My ancestor who wrote the coffin-bearing notes and the ancestors of past generations would never have imagined that after thousands of years, this profession would gradually decline. Perhaps, my ancestor simply wanted future coffin bearers to know the taboos of handling coffins, or the rules of carrying them, or perhaps they wanted future generations to know that there once was a profession of coffin bearers. Perhaps they anticipated that the profession of coffin bearing would disappear, so they documented it. These questions are now impossible to investigate. Am I supposed to dig up my ancestors' graves and ask them these questions? While you're still young, take the things our ancestors left us and organize them properly. Leave something for posterity. I truly admire Professor Joe's thinking. He's a person with particularly noble sentiments. Drinks are on me after dinner. Let me show you that miniature coffin. Let's see if you, a coffin collector, can see something. Can you, a mere coffin collector, make any new discoveries? Professor Joe then walked out the door. Professor Joe has dedicated his entire life to Chinese archaeology. He once led an archaeological team to excavate a Shang dynasty tomb. But on the very night of his departure, Professor Joe's wife, who was 9 months pregnant, was left in the care of his next-door neighbor. That same night, his wife's water broke. Although she was taken to the hospital, she hemorrhaged due to complications during labor. Didn't get off the operating table. That's not the point, actually. After the child was born, Professor Joe seemed like a changed person. He sent the child back to his hometown and continued his archaeological work. He dedicated himself to archaeology for decades. He didn't bring his son back from his hometown until the boy was in high school, but the father and son were like strangers. Finally, Professor Joe's son got accepted into a university abroad, and only comes back once every few years. I was even a little shocked after hearing this. I hadn't realized that behind Professor Joe's glamorous exterior, there was such a sad, unknown story. After dinner, Professor Joe smiled and offered me a drink. I've been really curious. How did you figure out this was caused by Chin Mu's coffin? Could I possibly say I guessed? If I said I guessed, I don't think I'd have the nerve to stay here. Alright, I also know a bit about coffins. If absolutely necessary, I'll just tell a couple of short stories from the coffin-carrying notes. Then I'll quickly open the door and get out of here. The miniature coffin was bought in Professor Joe's name. so it doesn't really have anything to do with the university. So the miniature coffin was kept at Professor Zhou's house. Professor Zhou's house isn't far from Northwest University, so it only took us a little over 10 minutes to walk there. When we arrived at Professor Zhou's house, I saw Professor Zhou's home was still kept in the style of the 80s and 90s. Those old things in his house have long since disappeared. But Professor Zhou had a lot of old things in his home, like a Shanghai-made 14-inch Gold Star TV, and an old-fashioned radio. I felt, did I travel back in time to China in the 80s or 90s? There's not a speck of dust on the Gold Star TV. I can tell. Professor Zhou really treasures these things. He's probably doing it in memory of his wife who died in childbirth. I saw in Professor Zhou's living room that he still has a wedding photo from the 70s hanging up, and a portrait of the great leader. These things are rare even in the countryside now. When I saw the miniature coffin in Professor Zhou's hands, my head rushed with blood, and I almost fainted. My eyes went wide, staring at that miniature coffin. It was so similar to the one I saw in the deep pool before. The coffin I saw in the well looks almost identical, whether it's the color or the proportions. This coffin is like a larger version of the one I saw before. Now that I recall the patterns on that previous coffin, I feel a bit relieved. The coffin I saw before was like a snake, all curved and winding, and the decorations on this miniature coffin are distinctly different. This small coffin and the large one were both discovered in the Qinling Mountains, and they were both made of ebony, which inevitably leads to speculation. Oh well, it's a strange world. It's probably just a coincidence. Professor Zhou held a piece of paper, and I knew immediately. It was the 6 patterns from the coffin, pieced together. The complete image, faintly, resembled a human face, as seen on this paper, but it wasn't clear at all, because the pattern on this paper could be anything. But it looks like it vaguely resembles a person. Professor Zhou asked, "Do you see anything?" I shook my head, indicating I didn't know. "No rush, take your time. We've been researching it for almost a month, and haven't figured anything out. Why not just open it?" I asked, puzzled. "Opening it is much more complicated than you think. This coffin's construction is even more complex than a Luban lock." I asked a few friends who specialize in ancient Chinese mechanisms. I looked around, and no one could understand it. Even they couldn't figure it out. They are some of China's top experts in ancient mechanisms. They've opened the 9 Dragons 8 Winds chain lock, and the Yin Yang 12 Zodiac lock. They looked at it for 3 days, and didn't even scratch the surface. But in the end, they came to a conclusion. This coffin definitely has something mysterious about it, and it's rigged with hidden mechanisms. How amazing. My friends are all experts in the study of mechanisms. In the end, they were completely stumped. They used modern technology, light scanning, hoping to see the structure inside the coffin. They found something strange during the scan. About half a centimeter into the coffin, the scan couldn't penetrate any further. It was as if some kind of material was blocking it. But through the light and shadows, we could still see many small mechanisms. Light and shadow mechanisms. I immediately thought of this type of small coffin. It's used to hold small objects. I thought about this small coffin, and wondered if it might contain a treasure. As soon as I said treasure coffin, I heard Professor Zhou chuckle. What treasure could be hidden in such a small coffin? I thought, he has a point. But I still tried to defend myself. I'm trying to prove my point. Perhaps this coffin holds a treasure map, or maybe a key to unlock a vast treasure. It's certainly possible. In ancient times, it wasn't uncommon for small coffins to hold valuable items. This is just my opinion, of course. As for whether it's a treasure coffin, it has nothing to do with me. Joer, have you been watching too many TV dramas? Why is your imagination so wild? At this moment, Professor Zhou suddenly froze. Perhaps Jinjiu is right. This kind of thing is not uncommon in archaeology. In ancient tombs, it's often the inconspicuous little things that are the real treasures. So the essence is concentrated. Think about it. When the flood came, this coffin must have been washed down from the Qinling Mountains. How could there be a coffin on the Qinling Mountains for no reason? The more I think about it, the more I feel uneasy. That ebony coffin also appeared after the rain. This time, I was the one who got flustered. Both the large and small coffins were made of ebony, and the commonality is that they both appeared after heavy rain. I couldn't help but fall into deep thought. Professor Zhou poured us each a cup of tea. I knew Professor Zhou had something to say. I've been researching ancient Chinese culture for so many years, and although China boasts a rich history of 5,000 years, the source of that history is like water without a source. Furthermore, throughout history, many nations have vanished without a trace. If the secrets hidden within the Qinling Mountains are uncovered, their significance would be no less than that of the 36 kingdoms of the western regions. Even those that once flourished in history, most nations, amidst the changing times, turn to dust in the pages of history, becoming sealed, historical mysteries. It always falls to us descendants to study them. I nodded. The Chinese nation truly has a long and enduring history, but much of it is fragmented. This requires more cultural workers to explore and discover. This is an extremely vast undertaking. Professor Joe then said with a smile, if it weren't for my teacher experiencing the 10-year catastrophe in the cowshed, wasting his most precious senior years, and most of his research, being burned as useless material. In the end, my teacher died in depression. He coughed up blood from anger. You wouldn't know my teacher even if I told you his name. He was the director of the Shaanxi Provincial Institute of History. Since the War of Resistance, he had been exploring the secrets of the Qinling Mountains. He dedicated his entire life to the country, and to archaeology. Tears clearly welled up in Professor Zhou's eyes. So, in the end, did your teacher discover anything? If my teacher had had 5 more years, he definitely would have completely understood the Qinling Mountains. I remember him telling me that there must be a prehistoric civilization in the Qinling Mountains. This prehistoric civilization is no less impressive than the 8 wonders of the world. Even the terracotta army, even Sangsingri culture, pales in comparison. But man proposes, God disposes. Who could have imagined my teacher's life's work would be reduced to a single sentence overnight? Could prehistoric civilizations predate the Xia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties? Certainly, the Xia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties are recorded history. But there are no records whatsoever of prehistoric civilizations. The only things left are some dubious legends. But it is these legends that have shrouded prehistoric civilizations in mystery. As Professor Vo spoke, I could sense a realm beyond the mundane. He was wholeheartedly dedicated to contributing to Chinese archaeology. I mentioned the Qinling Mountains when I briefly talked about them and prehistorical civilizations. In that discussion, I mentioned the Qinling Mountains. Also, in a project I've been leading these past few years, we discussed the true origins of Chinese culture. In the end, our research all pointed to the Qinling Mountains, this mysterious mountain range. In this lifetime, my only dream is to explore the secrets of the Qinling Mountains, to fulfill my teacher's wish, and my wife's hope. I don't understand why Professor Zhou told me all this, but Professor Zhou must have his reasons. Please, let me ask you, do you really have no clues about this miniature coffin? If you have any unspeakable secrets, I won't make things difficult for you. I told you before. If you don't violate human ethics, or the taboos of you coffin bearers, if it's convenient for you, you might as well give us a clue. If we can actually figure something out, I'll definitely add treats to drinks after my name on the paper. The papers I usually publish are in relatively professional journals. It's no exaggeration to say, if we actually achieve any results, at least in the field of prehistoric civilizations, your name will definitely be known by domestic experts. And it's also possible that many foreigners will know about it, because this is unprecedented, and it has my name on it. I asked curiously. I don't usually agree to things like this so easily. From the moment we met, I knew your family must have left something behind. And you have your own opinions about coffins. Although I don't know much about history and culture, but my understanding of coffins is only superficial. I'm thinking, if you actually discover something, won't I become famous? I'm not someone with grand ambitions. I just want to take care of my old man for the rest of his life. But Professor Zhou's passion moved me. Then, I said with a smile, I shouldn't look at things with a worldly perspective. Well, since you say so, I won't hide it from you. At this moment, Feng Yuro looked at me with surprise and said, you know other things? I didn't say anything, just nodded. Because I knew, maybe this was my time to shine. To be honest with you, Professor, the coffin in your hands is the #1 coffin among the divine coffins. Wait. Number 9, can you explain it a little more clearly? Professor Zhou took out a notebook and a pen, preparing to write down what I said. At this moment, I suddenly said jokingly, Professor, you and Zhou Jiejia, both of you, get yourselves a small stool and a notebook to take notes. I'm going to give you a lesson. Professor Zhou laughed heartily at my words, and readily laughed. The atmosphere in the room immediately lightened up considerably, losing its previous stuffiness. I then recounted what I had seen in the coffin-bearing notes. I told Professor Zhou that coffin materials are classified into 4 grades. They are God, 2 saints, 3 venerables, and 5 mortals. The 5 mortals refer to coffins made of cypress, pine, nanmu, willow, and tung wood. The 3 venerables are coffins made of red sandalwood, golden thread nanmu, and wangwali wood. The 2 saints are coffins made of jade and bronze. The spirit is the official of the ebony wood. 1 spirit, 2 saints, 3 deities, and 5 mortals. Professor Zhou said in surprise. At this time, Feng Yuro looked at me with admiration. I scratched my head in embarrassment. Where did you learn about these things? Why didn't I know before? Professor, if I could tell you, I'll tell you everything. But I also hope you won't make things difficult for me, because there are some things I truly have difficulty talking about. 1 God, 2 saints, 3 venerables, 5 mortals. Truly astonishing. You're right. Professor Zhou was looking at me. I quickly averted my gaze from Professor Zhou's. If I had looked for even 1 more second, I think I would have blurted out about the E-coffin inscription. You're absolutely right. Indeed, the coffins in the several ancient tombs I've excavated were all made of different materials. The Shang dynasty nobles. The Shang-ranked coffins were made of bronze. Shang rank refers to a regional feudal lord, so using a bronze coffin makes sense. So you're right. I now remember what Dad said about the coffin notes. They mustn't be revealed to outsiders. Professor, look closely at the small coffin in your hand. Have you noticed that the entire coffin is black? A translucent black? This dawn and dusk coffin is truly extraordinary. Extraordinary. Do you know the other name for ancient wood? Ancient wood is the king of all woods. It's known as the divine wood of the East. Moreover, ancient wood has many wondrous properties. Properties that other materials simply can't match. Let me think. Ancient wood official. Official ancient wood. Professor Joe kept muttering these words. After about 10 seconds, he suddenly stood up and slapped me on the shoulder, saying, I remember. My teacher said that the material used to make Qin Shi Huang's coffin should be a jade coffin or a bronze coffin. It also mentioned ebony. Right, at the time, several senior professors were debating whether Qin Shi Huang's coffin was made of bronze or wood. If it's wood, it would be ebony. It hasn't been excavated yet, right? We'll know once it's excavated. The technology isn't there yet. If it were opened, the damage to the relics wouldn't be insignificant. Moreover, after the air enters, countless treasures would be reduced to ashes. Then Feng Yuro said to Professor Zhou, isn't Mount Li also a branch of the Qinling Mountains? I suddenly zoomed in on Tulong and said, this small coffin couldn't possibly have anything to do with Qin Shi Huang, could it? At this moment, Professor Zhou chuckled and said, Xiao Qin, you're overthinking it. I used a fiber optic scope to examine its age a couple of days ago, and I can confirm it's several thousand years old. Yes, it predates the Qin dynasty. By this time, I said shyly, Professor Zhou, it's just you and Sister Feng here. I want to tell you something. It might be helpful to your research, but I don't want a fourth person to know. What is it? Professor Zhou asked in surprise. I've seen a coffin identical to the one in your hand, except for the different patterns on it. Everything else is exactly the same, and the coffin in your hand. It's a miniature version of the coffin I saw. Where did you see it? Can you take me there? Professor Zhou's eyes, a look of fanaticism flashed across his face. I've only seen it once. Whether it truly exists, I'm not sure now, but I definitely saw it, if my eyes weren't deceiving me, and the material of that coffin. If I'm not mistaken, it's also ancient wood. The moment I said that, Professor Zhou and Feng Yuro both lost their composure. I apologized to Feng Yuro, Sister Feng. I didn't intentionally hide it from you before, but there are some things I really can't keep to myself. Feng Yuro gave a surprised, wry smile. Little Nine, you really underestimated your sister. I didn't expect someone your age to have such composure, such steadiness. It's truly rare. I just want to burst into tears and say, I really still want to tell you. After all, the allure of a beautiful woman is still immense. Professor Feng looked at me. I knew I couldn't hide it any longer. So I told Professor Feng about the broken mountain we encountered while carrying the coffin. That's incredible. A mountain actually snapped in half. It's unbelievable. You mean after the mountain collapsed, a deep pool mysteriously appeared? You saw that large coffin in this deep pool? I nodded. Professor Zhou went into his study. After entering, I didn't know what books he was looking through, but outside, I could still hear the constant sound of Professor Zhou flipping through pages. After a long time, Professor Zhou slowly walked out. I picked up a random book in Professor Zhou's house. The book was called The Unknown Qinling Mountains. I saw the author was someone named Zhu Deming. After that, it said compiled by Zhou Jinluan. So I curiously asked Feng Yuro, is this Zhou Jinluan Professor Zhou? Feng Yuro nodded, and said that Wang Deming was Professor Zhou's teacher. The content of this book was compiled by Professor Zhou based on Wang Deming's research, but all of Wang Deming's manuscripts were destroyed overnight. This book was orally passed down to Professor Zhou by Wang Deming. Then Professor Zhou compiled it based on his memory. It took 5 years to write. That's damn impressive. You think? Professor Zhou's life, you could say, was both ordinary and legendary. In his youth, he was friends with literary giants of Shaanxi like Lu Qing and Lu Yao. They often sat together and discussed Shaanxi's culture and history. I'm utterly convinced. I just opened this little-known book about the Qinling Mountains, and the first sentence captivated me. The historical and cultural information contained within the Qinling Mountains is enough to span the entire history of Chinese civilization. This sentence truly elevates the significance of the Qinling Mountains to a height unmatched by any other mountain range. Everything I've seen in this book is about the Qinling Mountains. Under the currency of the Qinling Mountains, the Qin dynasty began its magnificent feat of unifying China. It unified the culture of the entire Chinese nation, and began more than 2,000 years of feudal society. Within the towering Qinling Mountains, the Han Dynasty reached its zenith. The ancient roads of Qinling hold countless secrets. But that wasn't what shocked me the most. It was the first paragraph I read at the beginning. The magic of the Qinling Mountains isn't just their height and majesty, but also their incredible inclusiveness of life. This is true for plants and animals, and even more so for humans. Standing on the high ground of the Longgang ruins and overlooking the basin, my train of thought quickly connected the Hanzhong Basin, and even the northern foothills of the Qinling Mountains, connecting the clues of many prehistoric hominid sites. The Longgang site in Nanjing, the Luonan Basin Paleolithic site cluster, the Gongwangling hominid site in Lantian, the Banpo village site. If we connect these regions, we seem to be able to sense the ancient human migration, the thread of development. I was completely mesmerized as I watched. Professor Zhou even came up behind me, and I was completely unaware. I was captivated by the Qinling Mountains for the first time. This is the mystery of the Qinling, the ancient civilization you just saw, and the recorded history. There's a gap in the middle. And what we need to do is explore prehistoric civilizations, because there are no direct written records of prehistoric civilizations. The events or figures of that time are generally impossible to verify directly. These events and figures are often imbued with mythology, but various research indicates that we are getting closer and closer to understanding prehistoric civilizations. I don't know what to say, because I'm completely in the dark about these things. I don't understand anything. Then Professor Zhou said to me, "You can imagine Fuxi standing on the Qinling Mountains, stroke by stroke, perceiving the universe, and creating the first astonishing works of Chinese civilization. Ancient myths, for us, are more than just words to be read. They are a heritage, a record, a hint. Back then, how did our ancestors live? How did they make stone tools from the rocks of the Qinling Mountains? A time from ancient history. The wisdom contained within it is in no way inferior to modern wisdom." I also found it incredibly surprising. I suddenly flipped to the last page, and I was stunned. I was so shocked that I dropped the book. This is impossible. The pattern I saw on the coffin before, Professor, is exactly the same as the direction of the Qinling Mountains. I took a deep breath, standing frozen in the room. The atmosphere felt like it had solidified. I could even hear my own heartbeat. After what felt like a long time, Professor Zhou slowly asked, "I know. It's unbelievable, unheard of, but many unsolved mysteries are discovered by chance. Professor, what do you think about this? I'll contact Lao Yuan. Then we'll prepare to enter the Qinling Mountains." At this moment, Professor Zhou said to Feng Yuro, "Go tell Qin Long to come with us to the Qinling Mountains. It's always good to have an extra pair of hands, especially since that guy's skills are exceptional. It'd be a waste not to use him. Can't Professor Zhou just give Qin Long a call? That blockhead, every time we meet, he just stares at me. It gives me goosebumps every time I see it. Qin Long is used to being in the army, so his eyes are different from ours. That's understandable. Besides, Qin Long has carried out many secret missions before, so naturally, his vigilance is much higher than ours. Okay, I'll go talk to Qin Long." Feng Yuro's face was full of reluctance. "Go quickly. This matter is no small thing. If Qin Long doesn't go, the wild beasts in the Qinling Mountains will tear us to shreds. Who are we going to turn to then? Qin Long has been on the African savannah, after all. He killed a lion single-handedly. Killed a lion. Is he even human?" I blurted out, "Just how powerful is this Qin Long?" After a while, Professor Zhou said to me, "Can you tell me more specifically about this ebony coffin?" I'm still a little dazed. "Professor who?" "You know how bog oak is formed, right?" Regarding how bog oak is formed, I looked it up. The information said this: bog oak is from 3,000 to 10,000 years ago, when the Earth's structure underwent natural changes, caused by earthquakes, floods, and mudslides. The plants and organisms on the ground were all buried in low-lying areas like ancient riverbeds. Some of the trees and rice buried in the silt, under anoxic and high-pressure conditions, and with the action of bacteria and other microorganisms, underwent a carbonization process over thousands, or even tens of thousands, of years. Therefore, it's also called carbonized wood. What Professor Zhou said is similar to what's mentioned in the coffin-bearing notes. As the saying goes, the north side of the mountain and the south side of the water are considered een. Generally, trees that grow on the north side of mountains or in autumn and winter are called een wood, and een wood is clearly different from bogwood. Een wood is wood that grows above ground, while bogwood is wood buried underground for a long time. Legends say bogwood is sacred wood. It can communicate with the gods. Bogwood is a ladder to heaven used by mortals. Therefore, it possesses spirituality. It remains unchanged in shape and color for 10,000 years. It's impervious to decay and rot for millennia. Not afraid of insects or frogs. If a piece of bogwood is placed in a coffin, It can preserve the body from decay for 1,000 years. If a coffin is made entirely of bogwood, legend says it can keep the body incorrupt for 10,000 years. It might even enable rebirth after death, and grant immortality. But a coffin made entirely of bogwood. But from ancient times to the present, no one has ever succeeded. Even if there were, they were pieced together. I relayed everything I saw in the coffin bearer's notes to Professor Zhou, word for word. I explained your meaning. The reason this ebony coffin is called a divine coffin is because ebony has the ability to remain incorrupt and undecayed for millennia. A body inside can be preserved forever. Haha, maybe I can even live forever. I said with a laugh. Actually, in many ancient texts and records, there are mentions of immortality. It's just that many of the discoveries now are fake. They are just the wishful thinking of the ancients. It was the ancients' way of expressing their yearning for immortality. That's what mummies are all about. Hoping to preserve their bodies from decay, so their souls can be reshaped later, and thus be reborn. But after scientific decryption, these are all just the ancients' beliefs about deities. Rebirth is simply impossible. Mummies are. Mummies have been found in many places in China. In 1958, an archaeological team led by my teacher discovered 17 specially treated bodies in a tomb. After the archaeological team excavated it, when they finally opened it, they could even see those 17 bodies. Facial hair, even the blood vessels are clearly visible. Because the technology was backward at the time, those 17 bodies turned into blood and water after being exposed to the air. But the most famous one is the mummified body, discovered in an iceberg in 1987. The female body had a fetus inside her. Because he was isolated from the outside world within the iceberg, American scientists, using advanced technology, were able to revive the child, although he only lived for 2 short days. But this made the scientists studying mummies ecstatic. The final explanation they gave was, within the iceberg, the mummified body has remarkably preserved its original life form. It's similar to a snake hibernating, except this mummified child has been slumbering for thousands of years. After Professor Zhou finished speaking, I was utterly shocked. 1,000 years later, the woman and child in that mummified womb could actually survive. It's truly a miracle. Professor Zhou then told me that in the desert regions of western China, mummies have also been discovered. The beauty of Lulan from the ancient city of Lulan is a mummy. The Lulan beauty further shrouds the ancient city of Lulan in a veil of mystery. A mystery that draws one in. Is the myth of immortality real? My teacher only mentioned it to me, neither confirming nor denying it. Actually, the immortals we speak of, it's not really immortality. People will definitely die. It's just the form after death, the way of existing after death. The mummy's coffin must be specially made, right? I asked Professor Zhou curiously. It definitely is. Otherwise, how could the body be so well preserved? I couldn't help but fall into deep thought. This body inside the bog oak, could it be like a mummy, hoping to be reborn after thousands of years? Thinking about it from today's perspective, it seems a bit absurd, but in ancient times, people's reverence for the gods, back then, the ancients, didn't have such advanced science and technology as we do now. There were a lot of things they couldn't understand. I was just about to ask Professor Zhou about the Qinling mountain range map, when there was a knock at the door. A man walked in. He looked to be about 26 or 27 years old. He exuded an icy aura. His dark and deep eyes revealed a sharp intensity. It made it hard to look him in the eye. He had a sharp, aquiline nose. His lips were perfectly proportioned. They were pressed into a cold, hard line. If he were to hold a microphone, he'd be the spitting image of Andy Lau. He's wearing a simple Adidas tracksuit. But even the tight t-shirt can't hide his brick-like six-pack abs. His sleeves are rolled up to his elbows, and the muscles in his arms are bulging. He's built like a fitness instructor. That physique, probably a figure many men dream of. At this moment, Professor Zhou said, "Qin Long, you're here." Qin Long simply replied with 2 words. So the man opposite me was Qin Long. The man Professor Zhou said could single-handedly kill a lion on the African savannah. I didn't believe it at first, but after I saw it, I believed it. I don't know why, it's just intuition. Professor Zhou said with a smile, "I'd like to see what you nicknamed Sky Falcon, Land Tiger, Sea Dragon. Is it really true? I heard from Euro that you're going to the Qinling Mountains. Yes, we'd like to ask you to be our bodyguard. Do we have to go?" Qin Long asked. Professor Zhou nodded. He turned and picked up the brewed tea, handing it to Qin Long. "Okay, I'll go back and ask the head of security for leave. When do we leave?" "We'll leave tomorrow. You don't need to take time off. I'll make a call to the head of security. I'll explain this special situation. I'll go back and get ready. I'll wait for you at the school gate early tomorrow morning." After Qin Long finished speaking, he got ready to leave. "Remember to drive the car up to the Qinling Mountains tomorrow. But it's quite a distance. You have to ensure our safety." Professor Zhou said with a joking smile, "There's nowhere I can't reach. and no mission I can't complete. Qin Long, don't you want to ask what we're going to do? Not interested. You history researchers are so old-fashioned. You have no zest for life. I'm speechless. After Qin Long left, Professor Zhou told me that Qin Long was a retired soldier from a certain special forces unit. He was injured during a mission. Then he retired to security at Northwest University. That's not the point. I feel Qin Long is definitely underutilized in security. Qin Long has been at our school for several years. He's also gone on several missions with us. Been down in a few tombs. Remember that time we went deep into the uninhabited desert? It was him. He saved the lives of us old geezers. Another time, I inhaled poisonous gas in a tomb. Because the ancient tomb was deep in the mountains, Qin Long carried me on his back for 50 kilometers to the hospital. That's how I survived. So incredible. What's impressive about him isn't his kung fu, but his wilderness survival skills. This guy is practically a freak of nature. He could survive in the wild for a year, no problem. I saw a film at school once about 2 Chinese Special Forces soldiers. The name of the film was something like Crossing the Amazon. The 2 Special Forces soldiers, faced with military training that pushes beyond my physical limits, and incredibly harsh living conditions, I constantly remind myself that the interests of my motherland are above all else. I represent the beliefs of the People's Republic of China. I persevered with my flesh and iron-like will, upholding the dignity of the national flag. In the end, only 2 flags remained. One of them was the 5-starred red flag. My classmates and I were so excited watching it. We were completely in awe of Special Forces. I never thought I'd actually meet a Special Forces soldier face to face. Even though Qin Long and I didn't exchange a single word, it couldn't hide my admiration. Wait a minute, I'll call those 2 old geezers over. I wish I could bring them along. After saying that, Professor Zhou made several phone calls. I had nothing to do, so I browsed through Professor Zhou's books. Professor Zhou had made annotations in so many of them. It really amazed me. Professor Zhou is such an archaeology fanatic. After about half an hour, there was a hurried knock at the door. Professor Zhou opened the door. I saw 2 old men walk in. They entered the room and sat down casually. One of them had the same hairstyle as Gao Shaosong. His silver hair, strand by strand, dangled like little snakes. Lao Zhou, any progress with the research on your coffin? I just heard about this the day before yesterday. In a small county town in Xianyang, they discovered a Han Dynasty tomb. Do you want to go with me? A flicker of emotion crossed Professor Zhou's face. Come on, this isn't the Qin Dynasty. Do you think ancient tombs would be of any interest to me now? Of course, aside from the excavation of the Qin Shi Huang Mausoleum. If the country needs it, I would still like to contribute my bit of value. Forget about it. A couple of years ago, Chinese and American archaeologists were discussing the excavation of the Qin Shi Huang Mausoleum. We weren't exactly absent from the scene. Our country's technology still needs at least another 30 to 50 years. The Americans have the technology to excavate it, but they actually said they could unconditionally send people to study the treasures we dig up. They can keep dreaming. Even if we don't excavate the treasures of our Chinese nation, we won't let those Americans get their hands on them. The old man with silver hair like tiny snakes said furiously. This time, I'm going deep into the Qinling Mountains to explore its secrets. You two just wait and be envious. Professor Zhou didn't tell these 2 professors about the coffin I saw. He told them everything else. Of course, this was when these 2 professors weren't around. He asked for my opinion. The 2 professors were stunned after hearing this. They had no idea that coffins had such a hierarchical classification. I've certainly learned something new today. I've studied ancient tombs all my life, and I've seen my fair share of coffins. This is the first time I've heard that coffins are classified into 1 god, 2 sages, 3 venerables, and 5 mortals. Haha, it's the first time I've heard of it too. The laughter of the 3 professors was mixed with a hint of helplessness. They've probably spent so many years studying antiques, and in the end, it's me, a descendant of a coffin bearer, who is telling them things they don't understand. Old Joe, what you mean is, your student went to the place where the coffin was found, and saw that old man? The old man who found the coffin experienced a flood, but the flood disappeared overnight. That shouldn't have happened. When floods and mudslides occur, they always leave traces of movement. The places they pass through are always devastated. But this flood vanished mysteriously. It's baffling. At this point, the 3 old professors fell silent. After a few seconds, the silver-haired old man said to us, this matter isn't simple. Old Joe, do you remember back in the 60s, when a farmer in Henan was digging a well? It was summer, and he was halfway through digging, when heavy rain started pouring down. After the rain stopped, there was no standing water in the well. The water disappeared immediately. Finally, at this farmer's house, they discovered a large Shang Dynasty tomb. You remember this, right? Forget it, let's not ramble. We're just theorizing now. Practice is the sole criterion for testing truth. Why don't you 2 come with me to Qinling Mountains? We won't go, the 2 old professors said in unison. Didn't I just tell you? A Han Dynasty tomb was just discovered. It hasn't been excavated yet. If it's a large tomb, I suspect many of the Han Dynasty's unsolved mysteries. I'll be able to explain it clearly. I don't have time either. I'm going to Sanya to attend the Chinese Ancient Artifacts Forum. It's not easy to get such an opportunity. I've already prepared the manuscript. I really can't go to the Qinling this time. I was thinking, how can I show off in front of those old guys? The silver-haired old professor said with a smile, your forum submission isn't about that Warring States jade pendant you discovered 2 years ago, is it? Professor Zhou asked doubtfully. How did you know? Those little schemes you have, do you think I don't know about them? These past 2 years, your time, I spent it all on that Warring States blood domain piece. I helped edit most of your students' papers. Professor Zhou said helplessly. At this moment, several professors walked into Professor Zhou's study. Professor Zhou took something that looked like a map out of a box. I looked closely, and it was a map of the Qinling Mountains. An extraordinary mountain range. Must have an extraordinary origin. The Qinling Mountains are a dragon vein. After bidding farewell to the Kunlun Mountains, the ancestor of all mountains, it travels eastward, stretching for over 1,000 li, finally standing majestically in the center of China, keeping watch over the land. From the day the Qinling Mountains were formed, they were destined to be no ordinary mountain range. They first divided China into north and south, and then nurtured early Homo sapiens. Later, they nourished the Huaxia people. Tell me, what kind of grandeur could surpass this? The silver-haired old man sighed and said to old Zhou, if you discover prehistoric civilizations in Qinling this time, you'll definitely shock the Chinese archaeological community. When you brag later on, it'll be much easier than before. If I hadn't promised the Shaanxi Provincial Institute of Cultural Relics and Archaeology to take on this Han Dynasty tomb exploration mission, I really would have wanted to go with you to see the mysteries of Qinling. Another old professor stroked the map of the Qinling Mountains and said to old Zhou, you know more about ancient civilizations than we do. Try to recall the entire developmental history of ancient Chinese civilization. Without the vast Qinling Mountains, would our ancestors' lives have been as rich and colorful? Traditional Chinese historiography never regarded ancient myths and legends as true. History actually needs to be verified. The silver-haired old man continued speaking to Professor Zhou. Yes, ancient myths do indeed need to be verified. But Sima Qian recorded on the first page of the records of the grand historian, that one who was born divine, weak yet able to speak, died young yet achieved wonders, lived long yet valued destiny. Before the emergence of the wise and accomplished first emperor of the Huaxia people, did China have a figure similar to the god worshipped in Western countries? This leaves us with much to ponder. Professor Zhou sighed and said, I remember my teacher telling me, throughout the history of human development, the ancient Huaxia people also inevitably progressed from primordial chaos to the Xia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties, and then to the establishment of feudal society. To study this period of ancient civilization in primordial chaos, the only things remaining in our hands are some myths and legends passed down. Therefore, we have to turn our attention to the demigods, a mythical age where truth and fiction intertwine. The mythical age. I'm stunned once again. What secrets do these ancient civilizations hold? Even now, this period in Chinese archaeological history is like a blank sheet of paper. The ancient times were indeed shrouded in mystery. It was an era without written records. Among them, there are quite a few who are equal to gods, but who can really say for sure? And, is there any evidence that can convince the domestic academic community? Professor Zhou said regretfully, is old Yuan going to Qinling Mountains with you this time? We've relied on him several times. Things our academic community can't solve. He got it after just a few glances, and he can explain it so thoroughly. I really wonder what his ancestors left this guy. The silver-haired professor also wore an unreadable expression. I'll give old Yuan a call. Have this guy come early tomorrow. Also, have Qin Long prepare some things. This trip into the mountains might take another 10 days to half a month. After Professor Zhou finished speaking, he picked up the phone and called old Yuan, as he called him. At this point, the two professors took their leave. They said they were going back to prepare for their own things. That evening, I was settled in Professor Zhou's house, sleeping in his bedroom. It was only for one day anyway. After Professor Zhou and I finished dinner, he took a photo out of a drawer. It looked to me like something an ancient person would use for drinking, raising a glass in a toast. Do you know what this is? It must be a relic. Duh. I'm asking you to guess its age. It's not from the Shang dynasty. Take a closer look. I've been holding this photo and studying it for a long time. I didn't find anything special. I'm not sure what this Dragon Clan inscription is. I don't know why Professor Zhou is telling me all this. I could only scratch my head and wait to see what Professor Zhou would say next. I noticed that this miniature coffin and this object aren't that far apart in age. No more than 1,000 years. 1,000 years, such a long time. Professor Zhou paused in thought. Zhuang turned his back. Actually, 1,000 years in the brief history of mankind is a very, very short time. What era is this dragon clan Feng Wending from? I don't know, because it has been lost. I couldn't determine its age. Later, after Professor Zhou explained it to me, I realized that the dragon tribe Feng Wending was a relic discovered by Professor Wang Deming, Professor Zhou's teacher. This artifact was destroyed during the Cultural Revolution. Only a photograph remains. You mean your teacher told you? The age of this artifact is beyond China's 5,000-year history? My teacher has appraised countless artifacts throughout his life and has never made a mistake. He was one of the leading antique appraisal experts in China in the 60s and 70s. He said this thing is at least 5,000 years old. After Professor Zhou finished speaking, he continued holding that photo, lost in thought. I previously read in a history book that even in prehistory, before formal historical records, the development of humankind within China's borders, including early hominids, late hominids, and matriarchal clans, as well as the legends of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, existed, until the final establishment of the Xia dynasty. And in ancient times, this period spans the largest amount of time, from approximately 1.7 million years ago to the 21st century BC, and the 21st century BC is precisely the Xia dynasty, the first era in China with written records. What Professor Zhou is exploring are the events before the 21st century BC. How far back we can trace it, no one knows. Unfortunately, after the Spring and Autumn and Warring States periods, many documents were lost. A large amount of historical material about the Xia dynasty and earlier was lost. After the Warring States period, the myths and legends described in the literature were mostly adapted and modified by the 100 schools of thought. Its credibility greatly decreases. Scholars studying ancient Chinese dynastic history simply dismissed the culture of the pre-Xia dynasty era and categorized the pre-Xia ancient history wholesale as mythology and legend. I stayed up very late that night because the conversation between Professor Zhou and the other 2 professors had shocked me deeply. I recall a line from the Coffin Bearers Chronicles. Coffin bearers are the root of spiritual communication, entrusted with the matters of life and death. In that distant ancient era, did coffin bearers truly exist? Even if they did, in what form did they exist? What my ancestors recorded in the Coffin Bearers Chronicles, something that violates modern science. Is it real or not? All this needs to be explained. Perhaps this time I can also resolve the doubts in my heart. The next morning, Professor Zhou woke me up. I looked at my watch. It was only a little after 6 o'clock. I was just about to go back to sleep, but Professor Zhou said we were going to install something, so I quickly got up. I followed Professor Zhou to his workshop. Professor Zhou had already packed everything up. I saw 2 large, full bags. I curiously asked Professor Zhou, "What's inside?" "The tools for archaeology. This isn't over yet." If I could still manage these 2 bags of stuff, but when Qin Long arrived driving the car, I was shocked. The trunk was literally packed with camping gear, and Qin Long was driving a Subaru SUV. The SUV looks really impressive. This should be a man's standard. The trunk even has things like a sleeping bag. Professor Zhou explained to me that going into the mountains is definitely not a 1 or 2 day trip. We definitely need to prepare drinking water and all kinds of food, just in case. I saw Feng Euro dressed very simply. She was wearing a sky blue denim suit. On her feet were a pair of leather boots, especially the jeans with a few rips, which further revealed her sexiness. In addition, she wore sunglasses perched on her nose, highlighting her fashion sense. I smiled at Feng Euro. I walked over to her and greeted, "Sister Feng, you're here. Why isn't old Yuan here yet? Can't that guy ever be on time? He's always late. Speak of the devil, and he shall appear." I looked at an old man. He called out to Professor Zhou from afar, "Old Zhou. Old Zhou, I see you." Professor Zhou looked at old Yuan and shook his head. I guess it was because the old man's outfit was extremely flashy. He was dressed similarly to a young person, looking very fashionable. "Why are you dressed so strangely?" "Maintaining a youthful heart gives me the energy to serve the country and its people." That old man is old Yuan, the one Professor Zhou always talks about. The old man whose identity I've been trying to figure out. Suddenly, I heard a burst of heavy breathing. "Grandpa, couldn't you wait for me? I'm almost out of breath from running." "Why is your granddaughter here too?" This girl wouldn't listen to me no matter what I said. She heard I was going to the Qinling Mountains and insisted I take her with me. "She's my only granddaughter. Should I relocate or not?" Old man Yuan said helplessly. "Ting, you said you'd take me to Sichuan that time, but you didn't. This time, I'm definitely going to Qinling." This girl is quite the assertive type. After we got in the car, those going to Qinling this time include Professor Zhou, Feng Euro, and Qin Long, old Yuan and his granddaughter. The 6 of us. "When did old Yuan leave your ancestors' belongings to you?" "Let me take a look at them." "You can forget about that. If I could show you, I would have done so already. It's been decades. Can you stop being so annoying? So, old man Yuan's real name is Yuan Chunqing. Professor Zhou told me as soon as he got in the car. That coffin photo you sent me isn't just some ordinary thing. Looks like it could fetch a decent price. Old man Yuan continues to joke around, but I'm very curious about what Yuan Chingqing's ancestors did. Could he be a coffin bearer like me? What did this old man's ancestors do? Feng Yuro and I were sitting in the back row. I asked in a low voice. Before Feng Yuro could speak, Yuan Chunqing turned around and said to me with a smile, "What did my ancestors do?" My ancestors dealt with the emperor. Back in ancient times, I could have been a top-ranking official. Grandpa, what did your ancestors do? I asked politely, because I couldn't figure out this old man's background. If I offended him, I figured I'd be in big trouble. Let me tell you, kid, do you know Wu Zetian's tomb? It was chosen by my ancestors. I am a descendant of Yuan Tiangang. The old man's words completely baffled me. Who is Yuan Tiangang? I've heard of him before. It is said that Yuan Tiangang was someone who knew astronomy and understood geography, deeply versed in feng shui. Yuan Tiangang understood feudal practices and could, based on the wind's direction, determine auspicious locations for appointments. He was also proficient in physiognomy, the 6 arts, and 5 elements feng shui. Of course, his most famous story is about severing the dragon veins. When my history teacher taught us about the Tang dynasty, Yuan Tiangang was one of the key figures. Through modern scientific research, it has been proven that feng shui does exist, but it's not as mystical as described in ancient books. This is your student? Such a young PhD. That's rare. It seems Yuan Chunqing has mistaken me for Professor Zhou's student. Professor Zhou said with a smile. He's not my student, but he'll definitely be interested in his other identity. What identity? Yuan Chunqing asked calmly. A coffin bearer. When I saw this, Yuan Chunqing's face involuntarily twitched. His eyes flashed gold. I felt a sharp, piercing gaze sweep over me. So you're the coffin bearer old Zhou mentioned. Is it a family tradition, or did you pick it up later? How many years have you been bearing coffins? Yuan Chunqing bombarded me with questions. I didn't even know how to answer that question. My family has been coffin bearers for generations. I haven't been a coffin bearer for long, but I could clearly see Yuan Chunqing's pupils suddenly constrict. After a long while, he slowly said, "Coffin bearers know too many secrets. As the saying goes, coffin bearers. He communicates with spirits, the representative of such people." Yuan Chunqing. I'm completely baffled by this. Do you know the Thai coffin maker? The Thai coffin maker is a unique figure throughout history. For thousands of years, the Thai coffin makers have been a mysterious presence. I bet your ancestors had a lot of stock too. What stock? I felt so awkward after Yuan Chunqing said that. I didn't know what to say. It seems you don't know anything. Top-notch coffin bearers deal with emperors' coffins. They can easily manipulate things. That's probably enough to last several lifetimes. So Yuan Chunqing thinks that my ancestors tampered with the emperor's coffin? It's true that imperial tombs contain many rare and precious treasures. They would have had the opportunity to take a few. But who would dare risk being executed along with their entire family? Yuan Chunqing's thinking is too simplistic. We finally reached the foot of Mount Duan. Yuan Chunqing looked at Duan Shan and said, "The mountain range has a flow, but no head or tail. It's a completely severed mountain." I have to admit, I underestimated Yuan Chunqing. He's just like my father said. According to feng shui, this place is a severed mountain, one of the 7 inauspicious burial sites. The so-called place where the 1,000-mile dragon rests, the converging point of the dragon vein's vital energy. In feng shui, this place is called brothers. Simply put, it's not suitable for burying people. Yuan Chunqing, looking at the broken mountain, said this to us. We climbed the broken mountain to check out the deep pool where I had previously discovered the coffin. When we got to the deep pool, it had inexplicably grown larger. It's almost twice the size of what I saw before. Water without a source. My dad said the same thing Yuan Chunqing just said. I muttered to myself. Could this old man actually be a Tang Dynasty national advisor? A descendant of Yuan Tiangang? There can't be an ancient tomb here at old Zhou's place. Who would choose this place for a burial? Not necessarily. There are always exceptions. What if there's an ancient ruin down there? You're overthinking it. Although the mountains here are steep, they don't meet the criteria for unusual formations. After finishing his sentence, Yuan Chunqing reached his hand directly into the pool. Why is the water here so cold? It doesn't feel like any water has accumulated. Could the water here be flowing? Forget it, we can't figure anything out here anyway. We might as well go check out Black Dragon Mountain. After Professor Zhou finished speaking, he walked down the mountain alone. The rest of us stood in front of the deep pool for a long time. No one noticed anything unusual. They shook their heads and left. We left the car in the village. Then, each of us with a backpack, we headed into the mountains. By the time we reached Tailonggu, it was already 4 or 5 in the afternoon. Heilong Mountain is far away. It'll probably take a long time to get there. When night fell, we set up a few tents. because the number of tents was limited. So, Professor Joe and old man Yuan Chunqing stayed together. Yuan Chunqing's granddaughter and Feng Euro stayed together. And I, naturally, ended up sharing a tent with that blockhead, Qin Long. That night, at bedtime, when Qin Long took off his t-shirt, I stared at him wide-eyed. "How did you get so many scars?" I asked. "On missions," he replied. Qin Long turned over and prepared to sleep. Hoping to get closer to him, I asked with a smile, "That scar on your chest, it must be at least 50 centimeters long. In the Amazon rainforest, my comrades and I fought a giant anaconda. We ended up falling from a tree over 20 meters high. That's how I got this scar, from the branch. I was absolutely terrified. That was freaking awesome. Fighting a python. He fell from over 20 meters and didn't die. Is this guy made of steel or something?" I couldn't sleep all night. I kept thinking about all the scars on Qin Long's body. That guy is terrifying. He must have at least dozens of scars on him. And none of them are small wounds. I even saw several bullet holes in Qin Long's stomach. What kind of missions did Qin Long used to carry out? Even gangsters wouldn't be like this. We continued our journey early the next morning. At first, I was very excited, but after a while, I started to get impatient. Fortunately, I had two beautiful women with me. Whenever I got close to Feng Euro, Qin Long would give me a strange look. Could it be that this guy likes Feng Euro? Actually, it's normal when you think about it. Men all like pretty girls. 3 days later, in the morning, we finally reached the foot of Black Dragon Mountain. The dense, primeval vegetation showed that this place was untouched. The path into the mountains was completely overgrown. I couldn't even tell if there were any traces of human activity on Black Dragon Mountain. By then, I slowly began to understand why the old man from the village had said that. Entering Black Dragon Mountain, there was a small stream beside us. Following the stream upwards, the endless peaks make me shudder. The higher I climb, the more I feel that this Black Dragon Mountain is a primeval forest. Trees dozens of meters tall are everywhere. Giant trees, like soldiers, guard Black Dragon Mountain day and night. When I reached halfway up the mountain, it was dusk. Professor Joe suggested we take a break. We sat down where we were. Then Yuan Chunqing said with a smile, "Old Joe, how did you discover this Black Dragon Mountain? This place is a bit strange. The feng shui of this mountain looks unusual. Even I can't quite grasp it. I'll tell you when I have an answer. You, the feng shui master, call yourself China's #1 expert in metaphysics. How could a mere mountain stump you? Who would believe that?" Professor Joe taunted Master Yuan. "The rain in these mountains comes and goes as it pleases." Following a flash of lightning and a few claps of thunder, it actually started to rain. "Let's hurry up and set up the tent." Once the tent was set up, suddenly a scream pierced the air. Ghost soldiers passing through. I scrambled out of the tent without even getting dressed. It was Feng Euro who had screamed. I looked in the direction she was pointing. A few hundred meters away, there seemed to be a group of people. Their clothes are different from modern people's. They look extremely ethereal. They're walking slowly in the mountains in an orderly line. Because the mountain fog is very thick at night, their figures appear extremely ethereal. They appear and disappear when Qin Long shines a bright light towards those dozen or so figures. But I couldn't see anything. Yuan Chunqing lowered his head, lost in thought. Ghost soldiers passing through. Suddenly, the moon slipped behind the dark clouds. When it reappeared, the figures had long since vanished. I noticed everyone's faces had paled. Could those figures just now? It really was Qin Long from that ancient Qin dynasty village. From that village, all alone, ran towards the place where the ghostly procession had just appeared. After a few minutes, when Qin Long finally returned, he said he didn't find anything unusual. Professor Joe then asked Yuan Chunqing, "What was that ghostly procession just now?" Those figures that appeared didn't belong to any of the 3 types of ghostly processions. After Yuan Chunqing explained the 3 types, I finally understood. The 3 types of ghostly processions all have different meanings. The first type of ghostly procession refers to ancient or modern armies that were defeated. These types of ghost soldiers are often very united, and their mindset is stuck in the time period of the war they fought in. They all believe they are still alive. They continue to fight. They want to uphold their military honor. The second type of ghost soldier is the one that borrows a path. This often appears after a great disaster where many people have died. These Yin soldiers refer to the ghost messengers and generals sent by the underworld to collect souls. Many people die after major disasters occur. In these places, many vengeful spirits gather together, unwilling to leave. The second type of Yin soldier borrows the path. They typically appear after a plague occurs. The third type is not caused by humans. It is due to the cycle, as one of the 6 paths of reincarnation. Wars will also break out. The powerful beings within the ghost army used their supernatural powers to make a portion of the ghost soldiers visible. Legend says that after Guan Yu's death, he fell into the ghost realm at night and became a wandering soul, waging wars everywhere. The passage of the ghost troops seems eerie. Actually, it's not consistent. You're talking nonsense again. You're not looking at this scientifically at all. Professor Joe said with a smile. That's how my ancestors recorded it. These are the 3 types of ghostly army passing through I know of. This is feudal superstition. It should be abandoned. Actually, ghost soldiers passing through is a supernatural phenomenon. A scientist in China who studies supernatural phenomena explained what ghost soldiers passing through is. It happens when a large number of soldiers die and coincidentally encounter thunderstorms. This preserves the scene. And when similar weather occurs, it reappears. I guess what we just saw was the same. After Professor Joe said that, I felt relieved. As long as it can be explained by science, I feel at ease. Let's go take a look where we were just now. We walked to the spot where the welcoming procession had just parted. Nothing strange here, just like the rest of the mountain. Feng Euro was walking along the path when she suddenly saw a purple flower a few meters away by the side of the road. She reached out to pick it. Just as Feng Euro's hand touched the purple flower, a vine suddenly shot out from the ground. Quickly entangled Feng Euro's hand. With a straight pull, Feng Euro was pulled by the vine for a good 10 meters. In the blink of an eye, Qin Long pulled out his kukri, kicked off the ground, and flew straight towards Feng Euro. But it was too late. Purple vines were dragging Feng Euro to an unknown location. Suddenly, the purple vines stopped moving. Feng Euro just stood up, about to speak, when she suddenly slipped. As she fell, Qin Long tightly held her. In a flash, Qin Long used his kukri to cut the purple vine wrapped around Feng Euro's hand. They both rolled on the ground and vanished. A few seconds later, a voice echoed through the open space. Professor Joe, we're all right. It was Qin Long speaking. After we walked over, I discovered a dense patch of purple vines covering a huge pit. Because of the purple vines, we hadn't noticed the deep pit. After entering the pit, Professor Joe discovered by flashlight that beneath this enormous pit were many other mysterious, smaller pits. He also found a large number of tracks on the pit walls. The tracks looked very strange. No animal he knew had tracks like these. The longest tracks were a full half-meter long. Suddenly, Professor Joe said, could these claw marks have been left by a prehistoric creature? But what kind of animal's claws could these be? The more I look, the more astonished I am. If you consider the surrounding claw marks as a whole, the prints strongly resemble those of a legendary creature, a dragon. Lao Zhou, don't you think these claw prints look like the mark of a dragon? It seems Yuan Chunqing also feels these claw marks resemble a dragon's. You metaphysics people are just being superstitious. Where are there dragons in this world? These pits weren't dug by just 1 or 2 creatures. They were passed down through generations. Why did these ancient creatures dig such large pits? Is it what? Just say it. Being with you is so frustrating. Impatient, Yuan Chunqing urged Professor Zhou. The Qinling Mountains are the dragon vein. Old Yuan's matter, you know about it, right? Of course I know about it. You know what I do. I work with dragon veins and feng shui. The Qinling dragon vein originates from Kunlun. It's the Zhong dragon among the 3 major dragon veins. The Qinling Mountains are worthy of being called the Zhong dragon. Nature has its own unique characteristics. One of these is the dragon vein's blood. The dragon vein emphasizes the unity of mountains and rivers. Rivers are the dragon's veins. Water is the dragon's blood. And the Yangtze and Yellow rivers are the 2 blood vessels of the Qinling Mountains. Qinlong kept surveying the surrounding environment, because Qinlong's mission is to protect us. As for the other matters, Qinlong naturally wouldn't say much. I remember my teacher once told me that the Qinling Mountains are very likely a mountain where dragons hide. The bones of true dragons may be buried within the Qinling Mountains. If I remember correctly, my teacher saw this in an ancient text from the Ming Dynasty. That ancient book is probably long gone by now. If it still existed, I could look it over and verify its authenticity. Knowing my teacher, he would never joke with me about something like this. Professor Joe said, head down, occasionally glancing up at us, as if recalling what his teacher told him all those years ago. The dragon vein, a place where dragons hide. What's the connection? If the Qinling Mountains are the dragon vein, then perhaps it truly is a mountain where dragons hide. Forget it, it's been so many years. I can't remember. Professor Joe clearly doesn't want to say more. He's stalling us on purpose. Although Zhou Long can't be found physically in reality, his image is derived from real things. It's mainly expressed through symbolism. In feng shui, anything vast, long, and continuous can be called a dragon vein. The Qinling Mountains are indeed an unparalleled. The emperor who reigns supreme. 2 old men of the dragon veins are constantlying whether the Qinling Mountains are truly a land where dragons are hidden. If you ask me, there are no dragons in this world. Professor Joe is an archaeology expert, yet he doesn't even understand this common sense. As for whether it exists or not, right now, it can only be described as a mystery. The Shuoan Jiezi describes the dragon as the chief of the scaly creatures. It can be hidden, it can be bright, it can be minuscule, it can be immense, it can be short, it can be long. At the spring equinox, it ascends to the heavens. At the autumn equinox, it plunges into the deep. Li Shizhen's Compendium of Materia Medica also recorded the dragon as the ruler of spiritual creatures. Wang Fu described its shape as having 9 similarities: its head like a camel's, its feet like a deer's, its eyes like a rabbit's, its ears like an ox's, its body like a snake's, its belly like a kidney's, its scales like a carp's, its claws like an eagle's, its length like a tiger's, with ornamental eyes. Its back has 81 ridges, with the total number of yang being 99. Its body is like a copper cheek plate. Beside its mouth, there is changran. Under its chin, there is a bright pearl. Beneath its throat, there are reversed scales. On its head, there is Bosun. It is also called Kinyalong, the toothed eye dragon. Those without toothed eyes cannot ascend to heaven. Its breath turns into clouds. It can change into water, and also into fire. I'm a little confused by what Professor Zhou is saying. For someone like me who hasn't gone to university, it's a bit difficult to understand. This is probably what makes the professor so impressive. Shoo! Qianlong suddenly put his index finger to his lips. It meant we shouldn't speak. I heard a slight disturbance above the pit. After a few seconds, I heard the howl of a wolf. Several howls echoed through the wilderness. They reverberated through the valley. It made my hair stand on end. Qianlong pulled his kokiri from his waist. He waved at us, signaling us to back away. We slowly, without making a sound, retreated. We were afraid of disturbing the wolf, whose eyes glowed with a menacing light. The wolf bared its sharp fangs at Qianlong and stuck out its long, blood-red tongue. I almost jumped out of my skin. I never thought I'd run into a wolf here. We're so unlucky. With this kind of luck, I should buy a lottery ticket. The wolf's fur is dark gray, except for its tail, which is snow white. It's very clear in the moonlight. Suddenly, the wolf continued its chilling howl. Its howl seemed to make its fur stand on end. It looked majestic. Its fur bristled, teeth bared, tail held straight out, and its back arched. It keeps roaring. Oh no, this is a sign that the wolf is enraged. You guys stay inside and don't show yourselves. No matter what happens, don't come out. Even if I die, you must wait until tomorrow morning to come out. Qianlong turned around, whispered to us. Ah, Qianlong, do as your mother says. But we all nodded in agreement. If we angered this wolf, we all figured we'd be in serious trouble. I thought to myself, didn't Qianlong single-handedly kill a lion on the African savannah? This wolf shouldn't be a problem, right? Thinking of this, I don't know why, but when I'm around Qianlong, I always feel a sense of security. But then something unexpected happened. Qianlong jumped straight up and started climbing out of the pit. By the time Qianlong climbed out, I was holding my breath. I even wanted to stop my heart from beating. I was so afraid I would disturb Qianlong. He crouched on the ground, holding a kukri in his hand, but then he threw away his knife and kept his eyes locked on the wolf. His gaze revealed an almost maternal kindness, a loving look, and he maintained a distance of nearly 5 meters from the wolf. I could feel how tense Qianlong was. After all, it was a real, live wolf he was facing. He actually slowly walked towards the wolf. I almost yelled, Qianlong, are you crazy? Do you have a death wish? Just then, Professor Zhou spoke in a voice barely louder than the flapping of a mosquito's wings. He told us, Qianlong never does anything he's not sure of. After Professor Zhou said this, we continued to observe the developing situation. Qianlong was now less than 2 meters away from the wolf. If the wolf attacked, it could bite through Qianlong's throat in a split second. I closed my eyes, because I don't dare watch the next scene. One man, one wolf. In their eyes, there seems to be a hint of threat and fear. Then Qianlong's eyes reveal a longing to approach him. Qianlong gulped. I know Qianlong is more nervous than anyone right now. If something goes wrong, he'll be saying goodbye to the world. At this moment, the wolf suddenly roared at Qianlong again. Because the distance between him and the wolf was less than a meter, Qianlong suddenly said softly, I don't want to hurt you. I'm your friend. His tone was extremely low, a low growl mixed with an irresistible. The wolf's fierce gaze suddenly vanished. I thought to myself, could this wolf understand what Qianlong is saying? Its bristling fur gradually lay back down. Qianlong plopped down right next to the wolf. We watched from inside the pit like it was a TV show. Qianlong suddenly turned around and grinned at us, showing that he had conquered the wolf. He kept stroking the wolf, displaying his good intentions. Suddenly, the wolf howled 3 times. The howls lacked the previous anger. Instead, they sounded drawn out and resonant. Qianlong took his backpack off. He opened a can of beef jerky. He dumped the entire contents in front of the wolf. Eat, he said. No sooner had he spoken than the wolf started eating the jerky Qianlong had given it. Strange people, strange things. A bizarre tale. If I were to tell the story, I doubt many would believe me. This completely overturns humanity's perception of wolves. After this wolf finished the beef jerky Qianlong gave it, it turned and ran off into the distance. His mentors and friends warned him not to move, meaning the danger signal had not been cleared yet. After about 10 minutes or so, The wolf came back, holding a bone about 10 centimeters long in its mouth. It was placed in front of Qin Long. Qin Long picked up the bone. He examined it carefully. Huh? Is this a gift for me? Qin Long asked with a smile. The wolf let out a low whine, as if agreeing with Qin Long. He then turned around and took another can of beef jerky from his backpack. He placed it in front of the wolf. This can. Consider it my thank you gift for the bone you gave me. Qin Long's hearty laughter and the wolf's low growl echoed through the valley. Perhaps their voices both carried a hint of pride, because they had conquered each other. Suddenly, a wolf's howl came from another direction on the mountain. The wolf's eyes suddenly changed. It let out a low, growling sound. Its gaze seemed to carry an unwillingness to separate. He patted the wolf's forehead and said, "Hurry up and go. Your little friend is calling you. The mountains are your true home forever." After the wolf got up, it kissed the can of food Qin Long gave it and ran off into the distance. By the time Qin Long allowed us to go out, the wolf had already disappeared. Qin Long's gaze remained fixed on the direction the wolf ran off to. None of us disturbed Qin Long, because of the bond between the wolf and him. Maybe it was over before it even began. Maybe they would never see each other again. Impressive. I underestimated you, kid, Yuan Chunqing said to Qin Long with a smile. But at this moment, tears glistened in Qin Long's eyes. Then Qin Long said, "When I was in the army, my squad leader was the son of a grassland herdsman. He taught me how to communicate with wolves. What gesture can make a wolf sense our human kindness? Wolves are the most intelligent creatures besides humans. My old squad leader told me never to harm a wolf lightly. Otherwise, I could make this wolf drop dead in an instant. But later, when my old squad leader and I were on a mission together, to save me, he ended up buried in that terrifying place. In the end, I only brought back his ashes. I'm so sorry." Then I saw Qin Long pull something. A willow leaf knife about 7 or 8. He then put it inside his boot. If that wolf has the Lingji mushroom, perhaps he thought he spared Qin Long's life, but in reality, Qin Long spared his. Professor Zhou, by the light of his flashlight, looked at the bone the gray wolf had given Qin Long. He looked at it for a long time. Then, in a tone of disbelief, he said, "On this bone, there's actually a topographical map of Qin Long's mountain range." As soon as he said that, we all froze. It was unbelievable. Then Professor Zhou said, "My head feels like it's about to explode. I almost fainted from shock. Look closer. Under this ley line map, there are even these drawings. These were clearly carved by someone." I watched as Yuan Chunqing took the half bone and examined it in his hands. It was indeed carved by human hands. Could these 4 strange patterns be a form of writing? Feng Euro suddenly said. I thought about it calmly. Because the Qinling Mountains map on this half of the bone is identical to the one I saw on the coffin, in the deep pool. Because I only saw one wooden board on top of the ebony coffin, and didn't get a clear look at the other 5 sides. The other markings on this half of the bone, which look like writing, could it appear on the other faces of that coffin? The thought makes my scalp tingle. I haven't told anyone about this conjecture, because even if I did, they probably wouldn't believe me. They would think I'm a liar. Euro, you're right. Perhaps this is some kind of writing. In the history of civilizations of ancient countries around the world, the invention of writing is considered one of the most important signs of the emergence of civilization. Ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, cuneiform from Mesopotamia, and Chinese characters were initially characterized mainly by pictographs. These drawings are probably early forms of writing, but this doesn't look like Oracle bone script. Could these characters be even older than Oracle bone script? Oracle bone script. Oracle bone script was also carved on tortoise shells and animal bones. Professor Zhou added, "I'll go back and consult with a friend of mine. I have a friend who specializes in ancient Chinese characters. I'll have him take a look. Maybe we'll have a lead." Qin Long, for our safety, moved the tents into the pit. We camped inside the pit. Professor Zhou kept studying the half bone. Seeing Professor Zhou's enthusiasm, I sincerely admire him. Perhaps only someone like Professor Zhou is suited for archaeological work, is capable of unearthing the secrets of ancient China. I have a feeling these patterns are a form of writing. And I'm certain that this writing has never appeared in China before. Professor Zhou lit a cigarette and looked out of the pit. A myriad of stars stand out in the sky. The mountain feels incredibly close. Only the occasional sound of wild animals can be heard. The Chinese nation is one that worships the written word. When Sangjie created characters, the heavens wept, and ghosts wailed in the night. In the mythological lineage, this is often compared to Nuwa mending the sky with stones, and Pengda separating heaven and earth. Oracle bone script is the earliest known systematic form of writing in China. It, along with ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, ancient Babylonian cuneiform, and ancient Indian script, are known as the 4 ancient writing systems of the world. It is also considered, along with the Han Dynasty Confucian classics, the Dunhuang manuscripts, and the Grand Secretariat archives, as one of the 4 great academic discoveries of modern China. The writing on this piece of bone. What kind of writing is it? Could it really be a form of writing that records a prehistoric civilization? The legend of Fuxi creating writing indicates that, 5,000 years ago, images were already evolving from realistic depictions towards stylized lines, and from ideograms. During the reign of the Yellow Emperor, Sengjie improved the writing system, and created the Jiajie characters. But as I've gotten older, my understanding of Fuxi and the Yellow Emperor has changed somewhat, especially my understanding of Fuxi. I went from firmly believing he didn't exist, to now suspecting he might have. Professor Zhou said with a smile, I'm completely ignorant of history, so I curiously asked. I often hear people talk about Fuxi and Huangdi, but who is actually older? Feng Euro, after hearing me, said to me with a smile, here's to you. Actually, you're right, many people can't tell the difference. But specifically, Fuxi came earlier. I'll give you an example, and you'll understand. We can imagine them in a company. Fuxi is the company's founder. The Yellow Emperor is the successor several generations later. He's the one who expanded the company. After Feng Euro's explanation, I understand. Emotionally, Fuxi is still the eldest. According to current relational networks, Fuxi is the ancestor of the Yellow Emperor. In our field of archaeology, we must make bold speculations. Only after you've ruled out all your speculations can what remains unexplained perhaps be the answer. Looking at Professor Zhou's back, I suddenly felt Professor Zhou's sentiment is a genuine desire to contribute to the Chinese nation, to unveil that prehistoric civilization to our people. The discovery of Oracle Bone script rewrote the records of world civilization, pushing back the history of Chinese civilization by over 1,000 years, and the writing on this half piece of bone in my hand might push the history of Chinese civilization back even further, 5,000 years earlier. Professor Zhou said, with a look of longing in his eyes, could these 5 strange texts really be from 5,000 years ago, recording the history of a prehistoric civilization? Actually, there have been many discoveries of Oracle Bone script. There's an Oracle Bone in the Tibet Museum. Scholars who study Tibetan culture say, that's a script created by gods. It's a script used for communication between gods. For a people with pure faith like those in Tibet, perhaps many things can only be explained by deities. We were just about to go to sleep, but I woke up several times that night. Each time, I saw Professor Zhou holding that half piece of bone, staring at it intently, muttering to myself from time to time. When I woke up this morning, I still couldn't believe that Qin Long was able to tame that wolf yesterday. It's incredible. Brother Qin, how did you become friends with that wolf? Wolves are spiritual creatures. If you have time, you should read a book. This book is by Jiang Rong. It's called Wolf Totem. You'll understand after you read it. All living beings have a spirit. 2 million years ago, the fiercest apex predators on Earth were 3, ranked in order of power. They were the terror bird, the saber-toothed tiger, and the wolf. Over 2 million years, only the wolf remains today. The terror bird and the saber-toothed tiger have long been extinct. So, there's a reason why the people of the grasslands revere the wolf as a totem. By now, it was morning. Professor Zhou only slept for 2 or 3 hours. I admire Professor Zhou's work ethic. After we freshened up, Professor Zhou didn't study that half bone, but shifted his research focus to the claw marks of the unknown creature we found in that pit. I don't understand any of it anyway. It's better to go out and get some fresh air. I don't dare go too far, though, because of that wolf's sudden visit last night. I still feel a little scared thinking about it. Yuan Chenqing came out with me, and then offered me a cigarette. I accepted it without hesitation. Qinjiu, your family has been coffin bearers for generations. You know a lot about coffins. I know we each have our own taboos, and secrets we don't share. My ancestors also spoke of coffin bearers, but only mentioned Thai coffin bearers briefly. Your ancestors knew about Shur coffin bearers? Haha, in some ways. We're in the same business. One of the skills we've passed down is choosing burial sites for people, reading feng shui. You're asking if there's a connection? There is a bit of a connection. What Yuan Chenqing said, it's actually true. If there weren't feng shui masters to choose burial sites, we wouldn't know where to carry the coffins. My family's ancestors recorded that top-notch pallbearers could communicate with ghosts and spirits. There are many mysteries surrounding you all. Mysteries. I thought about it, and the only thing about me that could be remotely considered mysterious. I'm a virgin. My ancestor, Yuan Tiangang, was also a remarkable man. Especially in feng shui, he was truly unique. Do you know the story of how my ancestor chose a burial site? Empress Wu Zetian once asked Li Chunfeng and Yuan Tiangang to survey and choose a suitable burial site for her. First, Li Chunfeng traveled for 81 days. I found the auspicious burial ground at Jiuzhou Mountain and buried a copper coin there. Then I asked Yuan Chu to search for it. After 49 days, he also found this place and inserted a silver hairpin from his head into the ground. Wu Zetian then had someone verify whether the auspicious burial grounds chosen by the 3 of us were the same. They dug it up and looked. Yuan Tiangang's silver hairpin landed right in the square hole of the coin. I know this story. Isn't it a legend? Let me tell you about this legend. It's not a legend. It's real. You, a Taiguan craftsman. Yet you look at things with the eyes of an ordinary person. Modern science can't explain a lot of things. Like, for example, this whole feng shui thing. Current science finds it hard to explain. Those ancient texts left behind by our ancestors. Who dares to say they're unreasonable? Let me think about it. Yuan Chenqing seems to have a point. Ever since I got involved in the coffin business, when I got the Taiwanese coffin notes, I felt like my whole worldview was about to be shattered. Talk of ghosts and gods is just to scare people. You're still too young, lacking in knowledge and experience. To put it bluntly, you're ignorant. Look at old Joe, a distinguished professor. You have to call for me whenever you go out. If there's anything you don't understand, you have to ask me. So, the things our ancestors left behind are still very useful. You should really take this to heart, kid. I'm optimistic about you. These words from Yuan Chenqing. I keep feeling like they sound a bit strange. Grandpa Yuan, I want to ask you something. If there's anything you don't understand, ask me. I'll definitely tell you everything I know. I won't hold anything back. I often see scriptures from heaven on TV. Do you think scriptures from heaven really exist? Yuan Chenqing was stunned by the mention of scriptures from heaven. He suddenly slapped his forehead and said, "Kid, you're amazing." Professor Zhou, look, isn't that on the bone fragment the Book of Heaven? Professor Zhou turned around and looked at Yuan Chenqing with a puzzled expression. After a few seconds, he suddenly smiled and said, "You kid, I've been to Hongya Cave inscription before. Those characters are neither fully seal script nor not. They seem upright, but not quite. Neither carved nor etched. Horizontally, they don't form lines. Vertically, they don't form shapes. The large ones are as big as a bushel. The small ones as tiny as a grain. These bone markings are clearly different from the Hongya cliff carvings. I'm not talking about the Hongya cliff carvings." Yuan Chenqing stamped his feet anxiously. Looking at Professor Zhou at this moment, he seemed thunderstruck and at a loss. He looked like a clay or wooden statue. At that moment, Professor Zhou stared blankly at the half bone in his hand. He then swallowed hard 2 or 3 times, as if his throat had gone dry. He muttered, "This is impossible. The true heavenly hub dragon soul script has never appeared in history. This is absolutely impossible." Professor Zhou still refused to believe what Yuan Chenqing had said. So, what Yuan Chenqing mentioned to Professor Zhou was dragon soul script. I knew even less about this dragon soul script. After Feng Yuro's explanation, I understood. Apparently, in ancient times, the human ancestor Fuxi called himself a dragon person. He meticulously compiled the Dragon Soul Heavenly Book using Dragon Soul. He transformed Wuji using the Hichu and Luo Shu. The great transformation of yin and yang, grasping nature, unveiled the secrets of the entire universe. Fuxi, the ancestor of humankind, observed the ever-changing form of the soaring dragon, and transformed it into sacred symbols. These are called the Dragon Soul symbols. He used these symbols to record the mysteries of Wuji, calling it the Dragon Soul Scripture. Yuan Chenqing said to Professor Zhou, "This half bone with the Qinling Dragon Bane diagram on it, don't you think it has any connection to the Dragon Soul Seal? The Dragon Soul Seal is formed from a dragon's soul. Didn't you say before that we have to hypothesize about everything, eliminate possibilities one by one, and what's left is the truth? Why can't we speculate? The 4 characters on this half bone, plus the dragon vein map of the Qinling Mountains above, aren't the legendary dragon-patterned characters?" Professor Zhou, after hearing what Yuan Chenqing said, suddenly took out a cigarette, and took a deep drag to cover up the unease in his heart. Due to the changes of time, the true Dragon Soul characters never came into the world. No one has ever seen it. What a real Dragon Soul character looks like. Old Joe, let me tell you, if Oracle Bone Script hadn't been discovered, would you have assumed it didn't exist? My ancestors recorded legends about the Dragon Soul characters. Did Yuan Tiangang also see the Dragon Soul characters? My ancestors were also in the Qin dynasty, and in the classics of an ancient figure, I saw it said. Professor Zhou asked eagerly, "The Dragon Soul character represents the soul of wisdom, the soul of spirit, the soul of thought, the soul of health, and the soul of morality." My ancestors even found descriptions of the true Dragon Soul script in ancient texts. Yuan Chenqing is being deliberately mysterious, piquing our curiosity. Come on, tell us. I don't like this habit of yours of always keeping us in suspense. Professor Zhou clearly knew Yuan Chenqing was about to show off. "Can't you just let me have a moment? Why did you have to expose me so quickly?" Fuxi said, "It begins from nothing and ends with something, originating in the heavens and achieved on earth. Once known, one goes forth with no return. Once known, one acts without ceasing. Once established in writing, it becomes the word action. Words become yin. Names give rise to intentions. Balance yin and yang. Receive it from heaven. Achieve it on earth. What is below ascends as essence. What is above descends as spirit. All treasures and spirits are one. 1,000 carvings, 10,000 joys in one. Constantly ascending and descending in form. Yuan Chenqing rattled off a whole bunch of classical Chinese I couldn't understand. Professor Zhou seemed to freeze in place, staring intently at the drawing on this piece of bone in my hand, repeating, received from heaven, formed by earth, received from heaven, formed by earth. I think I'm starting to get it. Thank you, old Yuan, Professor Zhou said with a smile. You're welcome. I am so well read, and even if I force myself, I can't convey all this knowledge to you. Anyway, you won't be able to learn my skills. Professor Zhou gave a wry smile and said, anyway, nothing can really be researched from this. I'll have my friend take a look at it. It's much more reliable than us guessing here. Oh heaven, it's hopeless. Awe and emptiness. The divine, also non-existent. Both awe and emptiness. You can ponder on this yourself. Call me if you need me. I'm going to appreciate the charm of nature. It's not easy to be in touch with nature like this. I can't miss this great opportunity. After Yuan Chenqing finished saying these words, he surprisingly pitched a tent and went to sleep outside the pit. I was speechless about Yuan Chenqing. What is wrong with this guy? Feng Euro said to me. Grandpa Yuan is naturally unrestrained and doesn't like to be restricted. When I was on archaeological digs with Professor Zhou, he only stepped in when we actually needed him. Well, I guess remarkable people have their own remarkable ways. After all, Yuan Chenqing knows more than us about feng shui and metaphysics. We'll follow the swamp tracks left by these unknown creatures and start digging to see what's underneath. Maybe we'll unearth the ruins of an ancient civilization. Haha. All you do all day is daydream. That time you tricked me, saying you'd found Tibetan Z-beads. You made me stay with you in the mountains for over a month. My toes were so frozen they went numb. And in the end, you just brought back a few ice sculptures. How embarrassing. Yuan Chenqing mocked Professor Zhou. So even Professor Zhou makes misjudgments. Professor Zhou's face clearly darkened. After a long pause, he awkwardly said, anyone can make a misjudgment. You, a distinguished professor, actually believed folk tales, saying that a Z-bead worth tens of millions was buried here. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come with you. Please, be more reliable next time. How many times have I suffered losses because of you? Every time we come back, it's always at that small bar near your house. A bottle of Baijiu and everything's settled. I must have done something terrible in a past life, meeting you when we were young. I've really made some bad friends. Yuan Chenqing squinted, enjoying the mountain sun, and kept teasing Professor Zhou. Professor Qin, lend me your knife. Professor Zhou followed a marsh track and kept carving downwards with the knife, but Professor Zhou wasn't strong enough and could only insert the knife 1 or 2 centimeters each time. Professor, you mean we dig down along these claw marks? Professor Zhou nodded. Qin Long took the knife from Professor Zhou. He stabbed downwards with force. The knife penetrated almost 15 centimeters. This is stone. Qin Long continued to move the knife. He carved a gash right into the stone. You could see the muscles rippling on Qin Long's arms. It truly lives up to the old saying, a horse can run on my fist, a man can stand on my wall. In just a few minutes, Qin Long used his combat knife to carve out a square, roughly 1 meter long and wide. Can he go any deeper? Digging 2 meters deep is a bit difficult, but it's still within my capabilities. Qin Long then reached into his backpack and took out a hammer. He then kept hammering at the rock. Every strike made me feel the pit tremble. When Qin Long used a shovel, when I was shoveling out those broken rocks, I was truly impressed. If he used that strength to compete in Olympic weightlifting, those world champions probably wouldn't stand a chance, because Qin Long's strength is simply tremendous. Even compared to the legendary Xiangyu, whose strength could uproot mountains, he wouldn't be far behind. From morning till night, Qin Long only rested for about 10 minutes, and he's been hammering at the rocks the whole time. At first, I thought Qin Long might have good explosive strength, but I didn't expect that his endurance would be so terrifying. He seems just as strong now as he was at the beginning. His strength is very consistent, and I've never seen Qin Long out of breath. Now, I finally understand why Professor Zhou chose Qin Long as his bodyguard, because this guy is just too terrifying. At this moment, maybe I finally understand the true strength of a special forces soldier. What you see on TV, it was completely different from reality. With a loud bang, Qin Long's hammer actually missed. In front of Qin Long, a fist-sized hole appeared. He was about to continue grabbing the hammer to strike. Professor Zhou quickly grabbed his arm and shouted, "Wait a moment. If I see anything, I'll shoot first and ask questions later. You're not cut out for archaeology, kid. Archaeology requires a delicate touch. If you were an archaeologist, you'd probably smash more than half the artifacts to smithereens with your hammer." Professor Zhou used a flashlight to look inside the fist-sized hole, but the hole was too small. I couldn't see anything. Professor Zhou had to remind Qin Long to slow down. Qin Long took out his willow leaf knife from his boot and carefully cut a circle about a dozen centimeters in diameter. Then Qin Long put his hand into the small hole. He literally ripped that rock right off. I just weakly want to ask, did Qin Long grow up on steroids? His strength is truly monstrous. Professor Zhou signaled Qin Long that he could stop. Qin Long then stepped back. We all looked at Professor Zhou. None of us knew what he was going to do. Then he took a small trowel out of his equipment bag. A trowel is a professional tool used by archaeologists when excavating ancient artifacts. If you use a trowel to dig something up, it's less likely to damage the surface of the object. Professor Zhou didn't actually use the trowel to dig. Instead, he held the trowel in his hand and kept tapping around the hole. Then Professor Zhou said, there shouldn't be any dangerous creatures inside. Professor Zhou's purpose was to explore inside that deep hole to see if anything else existed. Old Yuan, let's make a bet. I say there will definitely be a huge discovery down there. If there isn't, when I buy you dinner at the tavern later, I'll get you 2 bottles of baijiu and a large portion of edamame and peanuts. Yuan Chenqing rolled his eyes, showing his lack of interest in Professor Zhou's offer of baijiu and a large portion of edamame and peanuts. Suddenly, Yuan Chenqing pulled something about the size of a Wuji Bifeng 1 pill from his waist. We didn't even react before Yuan Chenqing threw us into the cave. What are you doing? Suji Lu, if the pearl explodes, it means there's danger inside. There could be poisonous gas or traps. If it doesn't explode, we can go in. If your grandma's leg were an ancient tomb, the damage caused by the explosion of this bead, even if it killed you, you wouldn't be able to escape responsibility. Professor Zhou fumed. Staying alive is more important than anything. If we rush in recklessly, and something goes wrong, can you take responsibility? My granddaughter isn't married yet. Yuan Chenqing is bickering with Professor Zhou. Alright, I'm not teasing you anymore. That mechanism pearl won't explode. Any area that's been rolled over can be detected to see if there's a mechanism. You're sensible. Professor Zhou suddenly brightened up. Keep waiting for my news. I'll go down and check it out. Qin Long tied a rope around himself and then lowered a scorpion to the ground to hold the rope. The other end. Qin Long entered. He was the first to go underground. But after a long time, we called Qin Long's name many times, but there was no response. Qin Long. Qin Long. What's the situation down there? Say something. It's been almost half an hour. Why hasn't Qin Long come up yet? Suddenly, a strange cry came from underground, making me think of something unpleasant. Thinking of that, I shuddered. The cry sounded like a bird. We were all stunned. Could there be birds down there? Impossible. Professor Zhou just checked. There's nothing there. It's winding down there below, Professor Zhou. Why don't you come down and take a look? Just then, Qin Long's voice came from below. Only then did we finally relax. We were so relieved. If something really happens to Qin Long, I can't imagine the consequences. After a few minutes, I saw Qin Long climb back up the rope. Professor Zhou hurriedly asked, what was that bird song just now? I was confused. Down there, because it was too dark. The bird song means it's safe down there. I finally figured it out. It's our special forces code. You wouldn't understand. You little. You nearly scared me to death. From now on, speak Chinese if you can, not bird language. Qin Long went first, and we slowly descended on the rope. I felt like we were tomb raiders. At the bottom of the cave, Yuan Chenqing looked at the deep hole ahead, and said, this wouldn't be a tomb passage, would it? I wish it were. This is clearly naturally formed. There's no sign of any artificial excavation, not even the most obvious sign of a tomb passage, eroded bricks. I actually wish it were a tomb passage. If it were, I'd be overjoyed. It would mean we're in the right place. My archaeological career would take a huge leap forward. Even a Qin dynasty tomb would satisfy me. In your dreams, there aren't that many ancient tombs for you to excavate, Yuan Chenqing said, looking ahead. To be on the safe side, we should put on our gas masks, Professor Zhou said to us. After we put on our gas masks, I had the feeling that it looks like something from the Second Sino-Japanese War. Those Japanese devils who were developing viruses, or to put it more elegantly, the scientists doing research. Anyway, this is my first time wearing a gas mask, and I'm still not quite used to it, but for safety's sake, we put on our gas masks. I'm getting ready to head in there. This pit seems like a tunnel. Some parts are extremely wide, while others only allow one person through. It just keeps twisting and turning. Anyway, Qin Long is leading the way up front, and Yuan Chenqing is at the back. There are 2 beautiful women in front. I'm not really that scared. Yuan Chenqing suddenly mentioned old Zhou. Wait a minute. I think this place is like, 9 bends and 18 turns. 9 bends and 18 turns. You think this is the Yellow River? 18 turns, my foot. Let's go. Wait a minute. I have a bad feeling about this. Yuan Chenqing took a small wooden box out of his backpack. He took out 3 cigars, lit them with a lighter, and stuck them in the ground. Then he bowed to the 3 cigars, and muttered, Ancestors, protect me. Ancestors, protect me. If I have disturbed your resting place, please forgive me. Superstitious mumbo-jumbo. Your feudal superstition should be abolished. Actually, I know that although Professor Zhou says this, he never stops Yuan Chunqing from doing all this. It shows that Professor Zhou, deep down, approves of these feudal superstitions that Yuan Chunqing is engaging in. He approves of them. I just offered my ancestors 3 Cuban cigars as a tribute. They must be delighted. 1 Cuban cigar will make them ecstatic, 2 will make them drowsy. Maybe 3 sticks will get us pardoned. Mr. Yuan, your Cuban cigars, what if our ancestors don't recognize them? Or what if they don't smoke? Wouldn't you be kissing up to the wrong person? Oh, Qin Jiu, you're such a rube. Our ancestors aren't going to show off with cigars in the afterlife. Come on, you two, old and young. We don't even know what this shot is about. And you two are already discussing it. What if it's a woman's grave down there? Wouldn't you two be embarrassed? Old Joe, you just don't understand today's society. Nowadays, girls smoke much more fiercely than boys. No one is paying attention to Yuan Chunqing. Because I guess if we keep talking nonsense, Yuan Chunqing wouldn't know what else it might lead to. The few of us just kept moving forward through the tunnel. No one could tell how long we had been walking, because it was pitch dark all around us. Professor Zhou and Qin Long's flashlights gave off faint light. We could barely see. Within 10 meters, we kept walking. The atmosphere was incredibly heavy. Just the few of us. Our footsteps echoed endlessly in the tunnel. Slowly, Professor Zhou signaled for us to stop. We all held our breath, waiting for Professor Zhou's signal, because it was too dark ahead. Professor Zhou had to ask Qin Chong to fire a flare. The flare is extremely bright. The light emitted by a small caliber flare can reach a brightness of 100,000 to 200,000 candelas. It lasts for 10 to 15 seconds and can illuminate everything within 100 meters. The illumination round consists of a projectile, a high-low pressure cartridge case, propellant, and a primer. The projectile acts as the payload carrier and contains a parachute flare, ejection charge, a delay igniter, an O-ring, and a spin stabilizer. The moment the illumination round left the barrel, we all stared intently ahead. Suddenly, strange, multicolored lights flashed before us. We were stunned, frozen in place. What's going on? When the last glimmer of the flare faded, we all shouted at once. Professor Zhou. The cave. A low groan came from his throat. And he continued walking forward. We mortals quickly followed in Professor Zhou and Qin Long's footsteps. Finally, a huge natural cave appeared before us. Professor Zhou shone his flashlight, and the stone pillar was a crystal clear white, whiter than pure milk. It soared into the sky, magnificent. Half a myth, a startling life. Yuan Chunqing exclaimed. That stone pillar is an unimaginable white. You could use every word for white to describe this pillar, dozens of meters tall. Qin Long was the first to walk towards the giant stone pillar, and ran his hand over it. I noticed Qin Long's expression seemed to change. Professor, how is this stone pillar so cold? It doesn't have a trace of warmth. Professor Zhou looked at the giant stone pillar, muttering to himself, stone pillar, stone pillar. Then we walked into the deep cave, and a wave of coolness washed over us. Above our heads, there's a vein of rock about 10 meters long, like a giant beaded curtain. A jade-like stalactite hangs down in the air. I didn't expect that a natural cave would be hidden under this mountain. Even if we don't discover ancient ruins this time, reporting this cave to the authorities after we go back up will be a contribution to the nation's geological understanding. Professor Zhou looked at the scenery inside the cave, and said with a smile, looking at this enormous cave, we can't help but admire the wonders of nature. The stalactites and stalagmites look like clouds, mist, and lingji mushrooms, growing on the cliff face, like dragons and phoenixes, carved on the wall of the Shao flute. Inside the cave, the sound is deep and serene. It is deeplying. Suddenly, Professor Zhou furrowed his brows, and said something that stunned all of us. This is very likely an ancient relic. Why? Everyone's eyes revealed a look of longing, waiting for Professor Zhou's explanation. Yunsuidong Cave, near Zukudian in southwest Beijing, is also a karst cave. You may not know about this cave, but you must know about the upper cave, dating back approximately 18,000 years. Humans lived there from 500,000 to 600,000 years ago to 18,000 years ago. In the different caves of Longgu Mountain in Zukudian, there has always been activity from ancient humans. And not far from where these ancient humans lived, there is a limestone cave. After Professor Zhou finished speaking, we all looked at him. This cave doesn't seem to have any connection with the ancient ruins, does it? Professor Zhou took out a flashlight and walked towards it. I kept thinking, what connection this cave could have with ancient humans. It's strange how there's such a huge cave under the Black Dragon Mountain in Qinling. Professor Zhou muttered to himself, isn't there also the Tianfui Cave in Jiashui, Qinling? Finding a cave here is actually quite reasonable. Yuan Chunqing explained to Professor Zhou, what you said seems to make sense. Nonsense. When have I ever said anything that didn't make sense? Professor Zhou and Yuan Chunqing are like a pair of frenemies, always at odds. but also like close friends. Inseparable. This is perhaps what true friendship is. As we continued deeper into the cave, I grew increasingly amazed by the wonders of nature. This place truly embodies the poem, 9 parts carved by divine sculptures and ghostly chisels, 1 part a wondrous spectacle created by heaven and earth. Pavilions and terraces, there are, strangely deep and profound, dense forests, eerie echoes, and a chilling air, stolen from the human world, 1,000 paintings. Breathing out, I wish to speak of the immortal landscapes of thousands of homes. How much do we truly know of the grand scene of Zhongnan? Here, it opens up an entirely new world. Professor Zhou seems to have been captivated by the wonders of this cave. Indeed, the strangeness of the cave resembles a mirage, precious stones and peculiar rocks. A natural wonder. I used my flashlight to follow the cave's security lighting. I couldn't help but marvel inwardly. It's truly a magical place. We passed several twists and turns, not sure how deep we had gone. We were all admiring the fantastical cave. This is a true wonder. All these stone carvings are exquisite, a masterpiece of nature's craftsmanship, delicate and elegant, intricate and majestic. Feng Euro exclaimed as she looked around. I see inside these caves some stalactites. Some are like white cranes, some resemble eagles, some are like precious tripods, some resemble golden bells, some are like crescent axes. It's truly a sight to behold. Professor Zhou suddenly shouted dragon, up ahead. We quickly ran over. I'm looking at it, right in front of us, like the skeleton of a colossal dragon, appearing before our very eyes. It really looks like a dragon. Holy moly. It actually is a dragon. We're so lucky this time. This is the first time I've ever seen this legendary creature, Yuan Chenqing said with a shocked look on his face. This is truly astonishing. This dragon's form is exactly like the ones in legends. It seems our ancestors weren't lying to us. Not everything recorded in ancient books is legend after all, Professor Zhou exclaimed repeatedly. Although this dragon is formed from stalactites, judging by its form, it should be naturally formed. Professor Zhou suddenly changed his tune. We all exclaimed in surprise. Naturally formed? How is that possible? Even Feng Euro couldn't help but question Professor Zhou's viewpoint. Look at this giant dragon stone carving. There's not a single trace of carving on the surface. It's completely naturally formed. It's just that we haven't found any trace of human activity. Sometimes, nature is just so magical. Often, the things we can't explain, nature gives us the best interpretation. After Professor Zhou finished speaking, he continued to investigate the giant dragon stone carving. Look, aren't there still water droplets on it? Dripping onto the stone carving. Drip, drip, drip. At this moment, drops of liquid were dripping onto the giant dragon stone carving. Nature continued to exert its charm. It amazed us. We can imagine. Our ancestors actually saw these giant dragon stone carvings, and based on them, they depicted the totem of the Chinese nation. Of course, this is just a guess. Perhaps our ancestors saw dragons under other circumstances. Perhaps that dragon was just a stone carving, or a reflection of dragon-shaped clouds in the sky, seen in the water. None of these possibilities can be ruled out. Euro, do you remember how caves are formed? Professor Zhou turned around and asked Feng Euro. The stone pillars in the cave, and all sorts of strangely shaped boulders. It's a masterpiece created by the slow erosion of water and carbon dioxide. Water containing calcium bicarbonate, when it drips from the cave ceiling to the floor, due to water evaporation or pressure reduction, as well as temperature changes, causes the solubility of carbon dioxide to decrease, and calcium carbonate precipitates. These deposits, accumulated over millions of years, gradually form stalactites and stalagmites. As water and carbon dioxide evaporate, the precipitated calcium carbonate accumulates into flowstones. When the stalactites hanging from the cave ceiling connect with the stalagmites on the ground, they form unique stone columns and other stone formations. After Feng Euro finished speaking, Professor Zhou nodded. We continued to examine the giant dragon stone carving. Exclamations of amazement constantly escaped our lips. A masterpiece. The dragon's appearance is impeccable. This is a true dragon. We each expressed our praise for the dragon stone carving. When I first saw the dragon stone carving, we couldn't contain our excitement. Lao Zhou, if we report the dragon stone carving to the state, do you think they'll give us a reward? I think so. If this place is developed into a tourist attraction, this further proves that the Qinling Mountains are a land of dragon veins. The legend of 8 dragons encircling Xi'an is not unfounded. The Sanqin land will likely stir up another wave of dragon vein fervor. Luo Yu's supplement to the area describes the appearance of a dragon. Antlers like a deer, head like a camel, eyes like a rabbit, trunk like a snake, belly like a clam, scales like a fish, claws like a hawk, body like a tiger, ears like an ox. This dragon stone carving is exactly as described. It's truly an extraordinary tale, a wonder that has lasted for millennia. Professor Zhou was describing the appearance of the dragon. The more I listened, the more I felt like the dragon before us was a real dragon. The giant dragon stone carving is identical to the legend. It's almost as if it was carved from the same mold. I previously read in a book called Strange Tales of Ancient Artifacts, 5,000 Years of Chinese History, about the origin of the dragon totem. One theory suggests it comes from the banners and uniforms of the Yellow Emperor at Mount Buzhou. The records of the Grand Historian, in the Annals of the Five Emperors, states that after the Yellow Emperor defeated the Yan Emperor and Qiyu, he inspected the four directions and held a meeting at Mount Buzhou. This meeting not only unified the military command structure and uniform styles, they forged a political alliance, and took elements from the totems of each of the original tribes, combining them to create a new animal image, the dragon. From then on, the various tribes in the Central Plains shared the dragon as their totem. The history of a unified Chinese civilization thus began. Therefore, all Chinese people are descendants of the dragon. This story, although it perfectly explains how the dragon, which doesn't exist naturally, became the ancestor of the Chinese nation, the discovery of dragon images in prehistoric cultural sites disproves it. It pushes the history of the dragon's existence further back, before the time of the Yellow Emperor. Some people say the dragon is a fusion of crocodiles and other creatures. Some say it evolved from snakes. Others believe it is a remnant of dinosaurs. Some think it is the result of a merging of totems. Some believe it is the manifestation of clouds and water, a collection of lightning and rainbows. There are various theories. No one in academia can pinpoint it, because the image of the dragon is like water without a source. Endless. Untraceable. Research on dragons evolves in every era. Historians constantly refute previous claims, pushing the study from the Xia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties back to the Five Emperors period. And then we refuted the theory that the dragon imagery originated from the Five Emperors period. We finally had to turn our attention to the Three Sovereigns era. Professor Zhou continued to explain to us. Feng Euro told me that the Five Emperors Professor Zhou mentioned were indeed real people. They were primarily the patriarchal leaders of some tribal alliances during their peak, and the Three Sovereigns are legendary demigod sage kings of antiquity, the founders of the Chinese nation. Looking at this giant dragon sculpture, I can't help but fall into deep thought. Could there really be dragons in this world? Are those ancient legends true or false? It is said that the Chinese people are descendants of dragons. Is it just a rumor or is there some truth to it? In the past, I would absolutely never have admitted that creatures like dragons existed, because dragons were originally just a spiritual embodiment of divine beings for the descendants of the Chinese nation. But the moment I truly saw the giant dragon stone carving, I began to doubt my previous views. For example, most of us have studied physics and know Newton's three laws. The feeling I had after seeing the dragon stone sculpture was comparable to someone telling me that Newton's three laws aren't entirely correct. Simply put, I was walking along the road when someone suddenly told me I would float soon. Get up, because on Earth, besides the Earth's gravity pulling you down, there's a force that can make you fly without using anything. Anyway, when I saw this giant dragon stone sculpture, I just felt like my worldview was shattered. My understanding of science has been completely overturned. Everything is because of this giant dragon stone sculpture. The shock was too great for me. I stood there silently, my eyes gazing up at the stone dragon. It was pure awe I felt as I admired the dragon in midair. Perhaps I should abandon my scientific approach to this. My teacher was right. Anything that exists is reasonable. Since dragons have legends, there must be a source. But this source, we, as archaeologists, have not yet found. We don't have enough evidence to prove it yet. It remains only in speculation. Professor Zhou looked at the dragon stone carving and sighed as he said, "Old Zhou, don't sigh so much. Think about it. If they really managed to research it, what would you archaeologists be needed for? Wouldn't you all be out of a job?" Yuan Chunqing continued, stroking the dragon's claws. "If I told you, no one would believe it. It's made using some casting molds. It's probably very different from this naturally formed one. Even the most skilled carving master would need several years to carve this dragon. It would take at least 10 years. After saying this, Professor Zhou moved to a different spot and asked Feng Euro to take a few pictures so he could study them later. If this Jiang dragon could be confirmed to be from the Three Emperors era, I, Zhou Jingluan, will never forget this even in death. Who are the Three Sovereigns? Yuan Chuanqing's granddaughter asked curiously. As for who the Three Sovereigns are, historians throughout history haven't reached a definitive answer, let alone us, their descendants thousands of years later. Tong Jian YG lists Fuxi, Shenong, and Gonggang. The Three Sovereigns Shangshu Dajuan is therefore for humans. Fuxi and Shenong are the Three Sovereigns. The spurious spring and autumn annals Yan Dushu refers to Fuxi, Nuwa, and Shenong as the Three Sovereigns. Which version should we, the descendants, believe? Professor Zhou finished speaking, and couldn't help but smile wryly. It turns out the ancients also left many difficult questions for later generations. Professor Zhou finished speaking. It occurred to me that from another perspective, very few people truly understand that ancient era, that so-called prehistoric civilization. Just a handful. Most of the ancients based their writings on folklore, developing their own styles, and passing them down to later generations, making it difficult for later generations to distinguish. Professor Joe finished talking about the three sovereigns, and I was embarrassed. It seems the ancients themselves weren't sure exactly who the three sovereigns were. Professor Joe shone his flashlight forward. About a few dozen meters ahead of us was a lake, probably a few hundred square meters in size. There's often accumulated water inside caves. Over time, it's possible for a lake to form. Most deep mountains have 1 or 2 lakes. Even 5 or 6 is possible. But this lake looks incredibly strange. The surface is completely still. It was like a mirror quietly placed there. Professor Joe walked towards the lake, but Qin Long stopped him. We naturally understood Qin Long's intention. He was afraid there might be other creatures in the water. What if something crawls out? Professor Joe's skills were clearly not enough to handle it. Qin Long calmed his breath and walked towards the lake. If you ask me, there's no danger here at all. I bet you can't even see a single fish in this lake. The water looks completely lifeless. Qin Long picked up a stone and threw it into the lake. The stone quickly sank out of sight. After more than 10 seconds, the lake remained still. Qin Long had just said I'm fine. But then I saw a strange sight. Bubbles were rising from the center of the lake. I stared, wide-eyed, at the scene before me. Qin Long was in danger. I shouted to him. An unknown creature is emerging from the center of the lake. Professor Joe saw the creature and shouted to Qin Long, water monster. I've never seen such a massive reptilian body. It looks like a lizard, but its head resembles a crocodile's, especially with that 2-meter-long tail trailing behind it. Its whole body is gray. It looks similar to the color of the ground. The water gray has long, slender 4 legs. Its head has pseudohorns, like antennae. I just heard Professor Joe say this creature is called water gray. As for what this water gray is, I honestly didn't know before. Anyway, I never saw it on TV before. This is the first time I've seen this. I adjusted my breathing and stared, transfixed, at what was in front of us. This approximately 5-meter-long water monster. Just then, Professor Joe suddenly shouted at Qin Long, get back here quickly. This is a water monster. I can't retreat. If I retreat, you'll be in danger. Quickly hide behind the dragonstone statue. We few carefully walked behind the dragonstone statue. I glanced at Shui Gui's eyes and shuddered. Those weren't the eyes of an animal. It's like 2 eggs embedded in his face. It seems like something really strange is going on here. There's actually the legendary water ash from prehistoric times. Professor Joe whispered to us. Professor Joe, what exactly is water ash? The Southern Dynasty records mention it in several million texts. Water ash turns into a flood dragon after 500 years. After 1,000 years, it transforms into a dragon. 500 more years to become a flood dragon. 1,000 years to become a winged dragon. I couldn't help but marvel. I looked at the water monster again. The water monster slowly crawled out of the lake, wagging its tail, claiming this as its territory. The water monster wagged its tail, frightening Qin Long so much that his hair stood on end. I saw the bulging muscles beneath his skin, twitching constantly. Qin Long pulled his kokiri from his waist. He held a lancet in his left hand, and took a half-crouching stance, ready to fight the Shui Gui. The enormous Shui Gui slowly crawled towards Qin Long. Cold sweat dripped steadily down Qin Long's face. I actually saw his legs trembling. Qin Long is a man who has killed lions and wolves, a man who has faced them head-on. It's no wonder this ash-colored water looks so terrifying. After all, anyone who sees this behemoth will feel a sense of inexplicable defeat. I never imagined, in this isolated, unique cave, there exist beasts that went extinct during the 5 Emperors era. Professor Joe said that the giant salamander, like crocodiles and many other reptiles, is extremely cold-blooded. If the giant salamander is provoked, it will become extremely ferocious. We've really bitten off more than we can chew this time. Joe, why did I get dragged into this mess with you? I really should be more careful about who I call a friend. At a time like this, Yuan Chunqing was still joking with Professor Joe. Old Yuan, this isn't an ordinary creature. According to unofficial historical accounts, the Shuehui once devoured an entire village, and he didn't even spit out a single bone. Professor Joe frowned and said to us, how does he digest it? How would I know? Go ask the ancient author who wrote the book. I've been wondering the same thing. Could it be that this guy, like a Pishio? In goes the good stuff. Shut up. Qin Long turned around, shouting at us. The giant water python was crawling towards him. Its 2-meter-long tail whipped out, nearly sending him flying. Luckily, Qin Long was quick, and with a nimble carp's leap, he dodged the python's attack. But the gray flood turned its body and opened its massive jaws. I clearly saw the gray flood's teeth, just like a shark's teeth, in 2 rows, top and bottom. Each tooth looked like a bamboo shoot, triangular shaped. I thought if I got bitten, my bones would instantly break. Qin Long was caught off guard. His body was suddenly wrapped tightly by Shui Hui's sweeping tail. Careful! Careful! We all shouted at the same time. A chill suddenly ran down my spine. Qin Long was tightly bound by the water wraith. He couldn't move. I saw the water wraith open its bloody maw and lunge at Qin Long to bite him. I was secretly shocked. I decided to risk it all. I grabbed a rock from the ground. I threw it at Shui Hui. The rock hit him squarely on the head. But Shui Hui didn't react at all. Panicked. I picked up another rock and rushed towards him. Then I yelled, "You beast!" Feng Euro and the others stared at me blankly. They were clearly startled by my yell. I took 2 steps at once, and in a matter of seconds, I was less than 3 meters away from Shui Hui. Shui Hui was obviously stunned by my shout, his eyes fixed on me. I stood still. I actually forgot what to do in the next moment. I was stared at fiercely by Shui Hui. Instantly, it felt like I had fallen into ice water. My heart tightened uncontrollably. It was as if a cold snake had crawled up my spine. At this moment, Qin Long was quick to act. He viciously stabbed Shui Hui's tail with his spear. Then, with his left hand, he wielded a willow leaf knife. It carved a perfect arc in the air, cleanly severing the Shui Hui's tail at the 1/3 mark. The Shui Hui, likely in shock, loosened its grip on the tail. Qin Long landed firmly on the ground. Suddenly, the Shui Hui's eyes flashed ferociously, its 2 eyes glaring like light bulbs, and it let out a sky-filling roar. Qin Long turned around and smiled at me. He said, "Thanks, but I can handle this. Hurry and go back." I rolled my eyes and walked towards the giant dragon stone sculpture. For those few steps, I felt like a triumphant warrior returning from an ancient battle, ready to receive everyone's adoration. Feng Euro looked at me with a look of disbelief. Yuan Chunchin's granddaughter looked me up and down and said something that almost made me spit out my food. A true master. Hiding your skills well. I didn't bother arguing. Let them say what they want. Qinjiu, actually, this old man is just old, so my legs aren't working well. Otherwise, I'd go over there. That Shui Hui would be scared shitless by me. Turns out, this Yuan Chunqing is a complete braggart. I saw Qin Long trying to fight Shui Hui with a military knife and a willow leaf blade. I think that's completely like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. A futile attempt. Completely overestimating oneself. This is not a battle of the same level. Shui Hui keeps circling around Qin Long, looking for the right moment to strike. Just now, Shui Hui's tail was cut off by Qin Long by 1/3. I guess Shui Hui doesn't dare to attack recklessly. But Shui Hui still has the advantage of its size. Still had the upper hand. Shui Hui climbed, while roaring at Qin Long. Qin Long also concentrated on observing Shui Hui's movements. Shui Hui's strength was immense. Even using its mangled tail to sweep the ground, the stalactites connected to the earth were swept by its tail, and a portion of them actually broke off at the base. Unable to withstand the immense external force, the stalactite suddenly plummeted downwards. A smile immediately spread across Qin Long's face. He kicked off the ground, tilted his body, and attacked towards Shui Hui. Qin Long's speed was simply too fast. I couldn't even see how he made his move. When the Qin Long landed, I realized that Shui Hui's left eye had been pierced by the Qianlong's willow leaf blade. Shui Hui went berserk and launched a furious attack, thrashing his tail wildly. Graphite flies everywhere he goes. This beast is about to unleash its fury. He rolled up his sleeves and yelled at Shui Hui. "I was going to spare you, but you came looking for this." His eyes had turned blood red. I could see in Qin Long's eyes. I saw a bloodthirsty look in his eyes. That's not the look of an ordinary person. Probably only someone who's been through many battles could have that kind of look. He moved again, because the Shui Hui's tail was about to sweep him. I reckon if you get swept by that tail, thick as a log, you'd be either dead or crippled. At the very least, a fracture. Qin Long Yuan twisted his first body and targeted Shui Hui's back. He leaped and landed on Shui Hui's back. At this moment, he looked like a god of death. Qin Long hooked his legs tightly around Shui Hui's waist and then held his kukri, continuously stabbing into Shui Hui's back. In just a few minutes, Shui Hui's back had already been pierced with over a dozen bloody holes by the dragon's subduing spear. Blood was spurting out as the bayonet dug in once more. I really couldn't understand how that water-like armor on Shui Hui's skin remained intact. How did that monster get stabbed by Qin Long? Suddenly, Qin Long yanked out the embedded military knife. A nearly meter-long gash appeared on Shui Hui's back. It looked absolutely terrifying. I remember Professor Zhou saying that on the African savannah, Qin Long single-handedly killed a lion. I may not have witnessed it, so I had no way of seeing Qin Long's prowess. But this time, I was completely blown away by Qin Long. If you think of the cement slurry as a giant dragon, then Qin Long has now transformed into a dragon tamer. Nothing is as impactful as seeing it with your own eyes. At this moment, Qin Long is the embodiment of a deity in my heart. At this moment, he is like a god. At this time, even the gods of the Western world, and Saint Mary, even the Jade Emperor, cannot compare to the impact Qin Long has in my heart. Although this is a joke. At this moment, only this sentence fits. Proof of the anglerfish's terror. I've been pondering a question. How is the anglerfish like a piece of gum? Stuck firmly to the water flea's back? The water flea is already in a frenzy. Its foreclaws digging furiously into the ground. You can clearly see, beneath the water flea's foreclaws, 4 deep pits appeared. That dragon swing was fierce. He's a true Special Forces soldier. Professor Joe praised Qin Long with admiration. Having this guy as a bodyguard is foolproof. Suddenly, several roars erupted from the lake. I saw a dozen black shadows in the lake. When I saw its true face, I nearly fell to the ground in terror. Several even more terrifying water ashes, each with bodies over 10 meters long, crawled out of the lake, and quickly slithered towards Qin Long. These beasts are pack animals. Qin Long cried out. A dozen huge water WYRMS suddenly surged toward Qin Long all at once. Even if he is the incarnation of the god of war, I reckon he'll be torn to shreds under the siege of this ferocious pack of water WYRMS. Damn, I heard Qin Long curse for the first time. Qin Long must be extremely frustrated right now. He didn't expect that after dealing with one water WYRM, there are over a dozen water lizards left. This is really unexpected. Qin Long is indeed a Special Forces soldier. From the injured water lizard just now, with one leap, he jumped out of the circle formed by these water lizards. That leap of Qin Long's must have been 7 or 8 meters. That was a standing jump. He could probably break the Olympic record easily. That's incredible. He grabbed the stalactite incredibly fast, and immediately hugged it with both hands, climbing upwards. He's as fast as a monkey in the jungle. The waves behind push the waves before. The new replaces the old in this world. Qin Long is a lot like I was in my youth. Yuan Chunqing continued his shocking pronouncements. These thugs all stared at Qin Long. I guess they were also dumbfounded. These thugs suddenly shifted their target, with lightning speed. In the blink of an eye, they crawled towards the giant dragon stone carving. This is not good. These Shuehui are after us. If it doesn't work, we'll go down fighting together. Anyway, I've got nowhere to use my primordial power. La Yuan, stop messing around. Professor Joe looked at Professor Yuan awkwardly, and said helplessly, my palms are completely sweaty. I'm so nervous. I blurted out, please, ancestors, protect me. I'm not even married yet. As soon as Yuan Chunqing finished this sentence, he gave his granddaughter a big boost upwards. His granddaughter started climbing up the giant dragon stone carving. Then Feng Euro and Professor Joe went up too. Only Yuan Chunqing and I were left on the ground. You go first. I'll cover you. You're older. No, you go first. Alright, if you insist. The younger generation is formidable. After saying this, Yuan Chunqing started climbing motionlessly. Holy crap. I've seen shameless people, but I've never seen anyone as shameless as Yuan Chunqing. I think Yuan Chunqing's face is thicker than a city wall. Qin Long had already taken another stalactite channel, and circled around to the top of the giant dragon stone carving. As long as Qin Long is up there, I'm relieved. So I acted tough and said, behold my ancestral 5 Thunder Blast Supreme technique. I then mysteriously gestured towards the water ashes, and quickly climbed onto the giant dragon stone carving. Suddenly, the water ashes stopped moving about a meter away from the dragon statue. They just froze. They wouldn't move forward anymore. I was puzzled. I was just showing off. Qin Jiao, your ancestral 5 Thunders Heavenly Judgment technique is actually effective.